This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Jay-Z Microphones, PreSonus, Spectra 1964, and API Audio. So get ready to rock.
Artists are inspired by what they're hearing at the moment, not after you've done all these things and you've gotten to the point of like, we'll start working the mix now. Like they're inspired right now or they're not. And if they're not inspired right now, then they're going to start fighting everything. They're going to start fighting the process. They're not emotionally engaged because it's not sounding interesting. You're not pushing boundaries for them. You're not trying hard to get them to be happy with the sound.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. If you feel like the fast pace of computer tech has made your studio Mac obsolete, then think again. OWC is your personal studio tech for memory and speed upgrades, DIY installs, and used Macs perfect for recording and mixing. Why ditch your existing computer when you can take your studio far into the future with the Mac you've already got? Learn how to supercharge your studio and find out how awesome your Mac can be at OWC.com so that you can focus on making great music. If you want a digital audio workstation that will give life to your music, from sketching a new idea to composing, editing, mixing, and mastering a finished record, then you want Studio One from PreSonus. Studio One is easy to use with intuitive drag-and-drop simplicity, making it great for beginners yet flexible and powerful for experienced producers. Whether creating beats, recording a band, or composing a blockbuster film soundtrack, you will find everything you need to create your masterpiece. Download your free version of Studio One Prime and get started now at PreSonus, wherever sound takes you. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Collin Dupuis, a Nashville and Detroit-based multi-Grammy-nominated and two-time Grammy-winning mixer, producer, and engineer. Collin has developed a sought-after sound over the last 15 years, working with critically acclaimed artists and projects including Angel Olsen, Lana Del Rey St, Vincent, Dr. John, the Black Keys, and many others. Beginning his career playing in bands, running a DIY recording studio in Michigan, and doing tech work around the Detroit area, he quickly found himself working at FBT, the Bass Brothers studio, as an assistant engineer. From there, he cut his teeth working with artists and producers of the likes of Mr. Porter, Eminem, Pharoahe Monch, or Monk. How do you say
Pharoahe
it?
Monch.
Pharoahe Monch. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
And many others. At FBT Studios, along with working in the tech shop at Vintage King Audio, he helped to develop a deeper understanding of studio work, both technically and sonically. This knowledge helped him make connections and bridge the gap into rock and electronic worlds of the Detroit music scene. Collin soon got a call to help set up a studio at Jack White's house and help out on the White Stripes' Get Behind Me, Satan. And shortly after that, he was hired over at Carl Craig's Planet E Records. He engineered for the next 5 years along Carl on remixes, production, live sound in Europe, mastering, and mixing. Collin next got the call from Dan Auerbach to help him get his Akron studio up and running. This led to a move to Nashville and many critically acclaimed albums, working as the lead engineer at Auerbach's Easy Eye Sound. During this time at Easy Eye Sound, he earned a Grammy win for engineering and mixing Dr. John's Lockdown, along with a Grammy win for engineering Cage the Elephant's Tell Me I'm Pretty. Currently, Collin is busy working as a freelance mixer and engineer, producing, recording, and mixing albums for artists including, again, Angel Olsen and Jeff the Brotherhood, who actually lives right next door to me, or used to anyway, I think, Nikki Lane, Raylan Baxter, and many others. Please welcome Collin Dupuis to Recording Studio Rockstars. Collin, are you ready to rock, dude?
I'm ready to rock.
It's great to have you here in the studio, dude. As I was mentioning just there, I read that one of your credits was Jeff the Brotherhood. Jammin' is my neighbor.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Those guys are great. They're good for. They're friends. They're beyond just like people I professionally work with. They're like really good friends. Like we hang out and have beers and barbecue and do stuff like that. Like,
yeah, those guys are cool. And their dad had Infinity Cat record store, right? Or something like that.
Yeah. Their dad helped them I think, as far as I understand, like is a part of creating Infinity Cat, the record label, which is what Jeff the Brotherhood put stuff out on their stuff, including other artists and bands. And it's just really cool. I mean, like they're really into curating and putting out records of stuff that they like, instead of really caring whether or not a major label is going to fund them or not to do it.
Right.
Like,
Isn't that isn't that the label that also Diarrhea Planet maybe started with too?
Exactly. Yep.
And then their name came up recently when Alan Parker was on the podcast.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and we were talking about all that stuff too. So you guys must know each other as well.
A little bit. Not. I don't know those guys as much like as I know Jake and Jamin.
Okay, cool. Dig it. Awesome. Well, again, great to have you here. Sorry to go on a tangent there. Tell us a little bit more about yourself. I mean, I just read your intro, but we'd love to hear in your own words, briefly as you want to. How'd you end up here in Nashville? What are you doing now?
I mean, yeah. Long story short, I basically just have been in studios for like on and off for, probably 20 years. Like I probably didn't really start making money doing this until, 15 years ago or whatever. Like I didn't start getting paid, to do it until like, the early 2000s. But I had been poking at this stuff since the mid 90s, like my first reel-to-reel and cassette tape recorder and different kinds of things like that was like, 95, 96. I graduated high school in 92. So, roughly after that, I started, I've always been in bands, played drums since I was a little kid. So I just started getting.
Yeah, your drumming is cool, man. We didn't even mention that actually. How did that not make it into your intro?
I don't know. Probably
Zoos
just because.
Berlin.
Probably because the bio that I gave you is more about the professional engineering side of my life, and maybe I just don't really focus on trying to sell myself as like
you can't
a
get away with
musician
that
as
on
much.
Recording Studio Rockstars. We're going to dig hard into your.
That's
drumming,
fine. Yeah,
your drumming
it's good.
is great,
it's just,
man.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's one of those things. It's just I started playing drums when I was really young. Like my mom got me a snare drum when I was 5. We lived in an apartment building, so I couldn't play it very much. I think I got a drum set someplace a little bit shortly after that from like the Salvation Army. My mom found like $100 Ludwig drum set or something like that was beat up, and I used that and played it. And then I kind of fell off from focusing on it because I was a kid.
Yeah.
Got into all these other things. And then it wasn't until junior high where I started going, wait, I want to do this again. And then I started bugging her, and then we finally moved into a house, and I was able to actually have a drum set because we weren't in an apartment anymore.
Right. Right.
And it's like, all right, you're not in an apartment. As soon as we moved in the house, I was like, you said,
kit.
So I pieced together a drum kit from a neighbor kid who had one, like my mom bought that like the drum shells, and I got some stands from a drum shop, maybe spent $150 and everything. And then I had the drum set forever until like.
That's half as much as I bought my first drum kit for.
Yeah. So I pieced together, it was like mismatched pieces. They weren't like, it wasn't like, oh, here's a kick drum from the 70s Ludwig, and here's a snare drum from, it's like, so I used that stuff and played so much in high school. I just constantly played, and then got out of high school and was just like, I really like drumming. And I got more serious I took lessons and got more serious into actual technical things and reading music and things like that. And auditioned for Michigan State University's jazz band because I want to learn how to play bop jazz. I want to learn how to swing. And they have a really good program there. I don't know if they still do, but at that time they had like Marcus Belgrave, which is an amazing Detroit trumpet player, like all these like visiting professor people who would be teaching courses there. And we're talking like serious guys. Here's Ryan Carter. We're talking about people who are serious jazz heavyweights coming in and giving lessons. And Max Roach came and gave us.
Yeah, I got to meet him here in Nashville.
So so I was lucky. I auditioned and got in and was able to be there for 2 years, just studying. I wasn't there to try to get a degree. I was just there because I wanted to seriously learn how to play, like swing and play jazz. And I learned Afro-Cuban stuff. I learned Brazilian stuff, and took all these percussion classes with like teachers who like played kunga drums. We learned how to play Afro-Cuban kunga ensemble things where it's like 4 people playing, each playing one little part, yada, yada. Same with Brazilian stuff. And we focused on all these different things that are elements of jazz music and the history. And all these teachers were constantly pouring history into our brains about.
And that was University of Michigan, you said? Right?
Michigan State University,
Michigan State,
which is my hometown, Lansing.
Right.
And so it was really great. And that kind of is what continued the process. And during that time of doing that, I started getting into sound, like, going, oh, I can record these jazz rehearsals and do these things and record myself practicing to get better at playing. Like listen back to cassette recording yourself and go like, oh, I'm getting off here. I'm swaying. It doesn't feel right. Like analyzing myself.
Yeah. That's such a big part of self-analysis is so important in things that you do when you're creating.
Yeah. Being able to like see that you're not good at something.
Oh, we should qualify that. Self-analysis in hindsight is important. Self-analysis before you do anything is a bad idea because then you don't do shit. Right?
Yeah. You won't get anything. You won't accomplish anything or even try because like you'll get on a rabbit hole feeling terrible before you even started. No, just to be able to analyze what you're doing and realize that you're not as good as you maybe think you are. Yeah. And then you can go, oh, I'm not very good. Well, but how can I improve this?
Yeah.
And so you analyze that. And that's always been my ongoing process, I think.
Especially if you love what you're doing, then you're really good in your head because you're so into it. You think that what you're doing
infatuated
is so cool.
with the fact that you're doing something that you love, but it's really hard to, and we all suffer from this. It's really hard to like realize that what you're doing is not that great. Or maybe it is, but it needs work in some aspect. Right. And so it's hard to step back. And so it's really good to have some kind of way of doing that in your life. And look at your creativity or look at whatever you're doing and be able to step back and go, oh, I need to improve this.
Yeah.
Self-reflection. It's, maybe it's my personality I need to work on. Maybe I'm too boisterous at times. That's helpful stuff to be able to be aware of. It's hard to teach yourself to do that and, to maintain that perspective. And it's like all of us, we have egos that needs fulfillment. We need to be liked. There's all these things that create a lot of negative things in your life. And you just have to learn to figure out where they're coming from and solve them, even if it's personal stuff or you're not good at your instrument, but why are you not good at your instrument? How can you get better at your instrument? And it was great to have peers around me who were way better than me technically and have teachers who were very encouraging, but also willing to just lay it online and like, you need to practice this more.
Yeah.
Stop messing around. This is adulthood. Welcome to it. This is college level music stuff. Like if you want to do this, this is what you need to be practicing more.
Yeah.
Like you're not practicing enough to a metronome or to an ensemble. You're not playing with people enough, like whatever it is.
I remember the self-reflection thing. You just reminded me of a time when we were recording a band rehearsal, which is always a good idea, I think.
Absolutely, yeah.
But the funny thing was, it wasn't the performance thing; it was the argument that happened. Where like my buddy, the bass player, got pissed at me,
so you could listen to the argument and go, "What's?"
No, it just happened to be. We just happened to argue, and I happened to be the one who was always recording stuff. And he had called me out and said, like, really called me out for like being lame and not practicing. And I got pissed and I thought he was being a real asshole. And then I went back and listened later and I was like, damn, he was exactly right. I really,
I took it too personally. Right,
I was totally wrong.
I took it too personally. Like I took it as he was attacking me, but he was just trying to tell me to practice more. Yeah.
And he was right, and that's whatever I was doing was no good at the time or something.
So fast forward past all that music stuff in my life, which was very informative and really good for me as just a creative musical person to develop an ear for feel and be able to hear song form in a jazz context, which is always changing. Like someone could just say like, we're going to change the form of the song right now while we're playing it. Like we know what the form is. We know it's a 28 bar blues or a 27 bar blues and we can feel that eventually, but to be able to just flip it and have someone go, oh, we're going to change the whole feel of this next round and
just be able to go
fluidly move it. It's really not saying I was super great at it, but it was helpful for, I think, developing my brain and my ear for music. Fast forward, I started getting into recording. I'd record all kinds of stuff. I'd record anyone for free. I recorded so much stuff for free, like so many of my friends, funk, jazz jams and all that kind of stuff. And punk records from local punk bands in Lansing, friends bands like my band. And then I started meeting people. I met my friend Norm Druce, who, rest in peace, who was Atomic Audio, basically. Yeah. Like we started a band together and lived together for years and made all these crazy recordings and had all kinds of, like, I had a PC with Sound Forge on it. And he had a reel-to-reel, like one quarter-inch 8-track, one of those Fossick ones. And then I got one of those Tascam 388s. And then he got half-inch 16-track, and we had, he had like a Soundcraft 200 series board, which
nice.
are actually really good sounding boards. And so we just developed like recording of analog tape and like the pre-Pro Tools era before anyone really had Pro Tools, and like maybe you had a PC program with like a sound card with an 1/8-inch jack on it, and maybe RCA inputs or something.
Yeah, that's
like
what
that.
we had. That's what my buddy and I. Our first thing was a card.
Yeah,
it didn't even have audio. It just had an AES jack that would go over to my DA30, and then we could get tapes in there.
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time messing around with that stuff. And I always was kind of poking at the computer, but at that point, the PC world and SoundForge and Acid Pro and things like that were just kind of fun, but they weren't serious, at least at that moment in the type of music I was into, and post-punk and like, Gang of Four and Jesus Lizard and all that stuff, like that I started getting into more and more, like and drum and bass and Square Pusher, and like, my palette was as wide as I could make it, like whatever I was into, I listened to it. So like the style of recording I was starting to get into, started listening and hearing what Steve Albini was doing and all these people who were doing really interesting sounding records in their mid 90s or early 90s. I was like, oh, analog tape is the way to go. And it still was the de facto technology in recording at that point. Like when tape op would talk about, the early tape op would talk about recording and talk about how things were done, it was all analog tape. There was very few computer conversations going on at that point.
Right.
These are cassette tapes so like me and my friend Norm, we kept doing it. We kept buying stuff, and eventually we had a 2-inch 24-track MCI machine, like this one you have right here, like an ADM discrete broadcast board, and like just like all this stuff built up, and we record metal bands and punk bands and weird garagey bands and like whatever, just trying to like get better at, and also trying to make some money. We're like, cutting deals, like, oh, we'll do your record for $600, like the whole record, like, and you do a whole record for $600, like,
and then after the band leaves, you guys high-fived each other, right?
Yeah. No, that money was basically buying us food and like beer.
Yeah.
Like we weren't paying bills with that money. Like that kind of money didn't get you anywhere, but it got us experience, and you could say like, here's a vinyl that was pressed that we did. It doesn't sound amazing, but it's cool sounding. Like
there's a painting in the other room that is the cover of one of my band's albums, and there's 3 items on it, and they were the 3 things that we decided were the staples of life at that exact same kind of chapter in our lives, and it's called water, bread, and beer. It's just like, as long as you had water, like a love for white bread and beer, you had everything you needed. And you just
in your early 20s, it's okay to like live like that. Life starts getting more complex when you start desiring things. Or you have that experience where you're like, oh, really delicious food is expensive. Like,
I know.
You're like, oh, okay. But so that's a different whole conversation. But yeah, so that's
great. A
lot of experience recording really cool, fun records with people for no money, but having a good time, and the camaraderie that comes with that, and the struggle of it, like not understanding what you're doing, and like knowing that you could make it something, but not really knowing how to do it yet. You're just listening and going, I'm turning knobs, and like having no clue how EQs really work or how compression really works. And having like, I think I had one compressor, which was really weird. I got an LA3A from a pawn shop that I was working at. Okay, so this pawn shop there's this pawn shop in Lansing, Michigan that owns a music store, and they're able to carry their pawn license over to that music store, a used music store that could buy and sell equipment. So they could buy any kind of musical equipment with their pawn license and offer pawn style buyback scenarios.
Oh, interesting.
For musicians to come and like sell something, pawn it. It wouldn't end up on the floor right away, and they had 10 days to come and pay it back and get it back, right?
So would you actually like, would you like invest in a piece of gear to go make a 10-day record and then try and finish it and return
I never
it
had any kind of
like
money
that?
to do that. Like the way I did it was at the pawn shop or the music store was like that. As employees, we had a thing called first dibs or they called it shotgunning. If like something came in and you could say, I'm claiming that, and you'd put your name on it with a piece of like masking tape.
Oh, so you were working there?
Yeah, I was working there in the drum shop just because I was like, oh, cheap drum stuff, cheap drumsticks, cheap drum heads, like super, 30%, 40% off of stuff, So this guy brought an LA3A in to pawn. And I was like, I want this. Like, I know that's cool because it's old looking. It's got to be cool. I didn't know much about it, but I just was like, that's got to be cool.
I know the feeling. It's not always the best thing for us, but I know that feeling.
I put my name on it, and the guy didn't come back and buy it. And then as soon as the fact that that 10-day lapse, whatever, it was automatically mine. And I just had to pay 10 or 20% more than what the business paid him.
Right. Okay.
That was the rule. Like the way they so that the business still was making a 10 or 20% markup over the money they gave him for it. And of course they lowballed him, of course, because it's
storage fee for people.
Yeah. Basically, like they gave him, it was like $120 or something for 100 or maybe $140 or something they gave him for it. And so I paid like less than $300. I don't know. I don't feel doing the math.
Well, the 20% was probably the interest that they were going to make on that loan.
Yeah, if he was going to come back.
If he did, he didn't pay it back.
Because he was going to come back, that he would have to pay what I paid for it, basically, to get it back.
Exactly. You want the critical details from your microphone to get through to your recording, and the Spectra 1964 101 amplifier provides just that. With unequaled headroom, low noise, and a linear output, irrespective of transient audio peaks. Used by Tom Dowd, Muscle Shoals, Stax Studios, and The Record Plant on records by ZZ Top, Aerosmith, Bruce Springsteen, and John Lennon, Spectra 1964 brings that same incredible sound to your studio with the new STX 600 mic pre with built-in comp limiter. Start making classic records again at Spectra1964.com. Are you sick of microphones that make your music sound harsh and brittle? The new Amethyst mic by Jay-Z Microphones brings you a rich, warm tone with perfect detail using the golden capsule technology. Resulting from 30 years of microphone design, the Amethyst is hand-built using carefully selected parts with Class A discrete circuitry, extremely low self-noise, and an advanced shock mount to make sure your recordings sound awesome. This is my voice on the Amethyst right now. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 50% off the Amethyst mic at jzmic.com.
So I got an LA3A, which is ridiculously expensive.
And now, do you still have that piece?
I still have the LA3A. Nice, absolutely.
Dude. You still using it?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's LA3A. You don't sell LA3As.
No, not at all.
Unless for some reason you absolutely are going homeless or something, and then you sell your stuff. But
no, and I still don't have one. I got my 1176, but
I mean, the same. It's like in that it's one of those things where you get it, and once you start. So that was the first compressor we had in our arsenal. It was a pretty heavy hitter compressor to have, something to like learn what compression sounds like on. It sounds awesome. So everything went through that. As soon as we had that, it was like everything we did, every overdub we did got plugged into the LA3A, and you'd start using it on everything. And sometimes we'd overcompress stuff because like everything in the whole album got overdubbed with an LA3A. Like, you know,
it's funny hearing you tell this backstory of being so into jazz and jazz drums.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it connects to me because like listening to your records and knowing what I know about you, you have a real appreciation for tone. You even talk about that in your bio, like this pursuit of a really unique sound. And I think that when you come from a real love of bebop jazz and that kind of sound, and artists like Max Roach, you appreciate the tone of a drum kit and everything like that. And you probably learned a lot about how to get the drums themselves to sound right before you even learned anything about how to record it,
Yeah, I mean, and I think as like when you go and start studying a musical genre that's focused, that is way older than you are, and it's not even really it's now just an academia thing. It was even then, like that's where jazz, not trying to disqualify modern jazz and where it's at now or anything, but just overall bop jazz or swing jazz or even the cool, slower funk jazz of the 70s, like all that stuff. That was way before my time. So that was already academia at that point. That's just, you listen to it, you're a fan of it. But the sounds and the engineers, think of all these amazing, the Blue Note record, like all these amazing studios in New York that recorded these records, and these engineers who were really good engineers.
Yeah.
These guys were the top of audio engineers at the time. If you imagine, these guys were able to record full ensembles with very few microphones and get these amazingly open sounding recordings with no compression on them and no EQ on it. They didn't have EQs. Like 1940s, they didn't
did
have
all the stuff in the house.
What is that guy's name?
Oh man, I thought you were. I totally blanked on it too.
I blank out on that guy.
The rock stars listening now, right now, they're going like, "Come on,
you guys! Yeah, what's wrong with you?" Rudy Van Gelder.
Yeah, Rudy Van Gelder. Yes,
I knew it'd come to me.
Yeah.
So Rudy Van Gelder was one of those he like created modern jazz recording like at that time. Like he really pushed with minimalism, like a tape machine and microphones. Like that's it. Like probably a 3-channel tube mixing board being summed to mono onto one track, and like had to capture these amazing performances. And he did. He did an amazing job of it. So you start learning like from, I think it just through osmosis of listening to those kind of records and then tuning your drums to make them sound that way when you're like studying the music. So like, oh, your toms, like your drum to be pitched higher so the stand-up bass wasn't getting tromped on by the bass drum.
Interesting.
Like
your
goal,
that.
the goal was, and this was a conversation in these classes with the teachers telling us like, drummers, pitch that stuff up higher. Don't play the bass drum so hard. Don't bang on the drums. Like leave room for things. I mean, of course, get loud when it's but like try to be dynamic. Try to leave room for a vocalist to sing without a PA system. If you know someone's singing in the room and be like be able to play fast and swing really quietly, and to hear stand up bass properly without there's always a little bit of amplification nowadays, even with that kind of thing, but still like you're all over that instrument if you're in the same room with it, if your bass drum is tuned at the same notes that's playing at.
Well, the whole kick and snare relationship is completely different in rock and pop music than it is in jazz. I mean, jazz, the kick is like, I'm not even sure where it lands. It just lands like in these explosive moments, and that's what it's
just because it's not the rhythm of jazz and the basis of a jazz drumming is not driven by kick and snare, it's driven by hi-hat and ride cymbal. The pushing and forward motion of the rhythmic stuff the drummer does is because of the swing comes from the feel of what the hi-hat, interplay between the hi-hat and the ride cymbal, and how the drummer is making the pulse feel off of that. That's why all these like Elvin Jones and Tony Williams and Max Roach and all those guys all had a different feel to it. It was all because of what they did with the ride cymbal, really. And how the hi-hat played around that. But like Elvin Jones is like, you go listen to Elvin Jones. I mean, if anyone out there listening doesn't know who Elvin Jones is and hasn't spent any time, you need to go and listen to Elvin Jones to get an idea of like how much he probably affected modern rock in the ways, because a lot of rock drummers were listening to him, and a lot of the feel of groove and the way his way he pushes and the way he the way he focuses on the upbeat instead of the downbeat of things. So it's like instead of like is how where he pushes. Like, so it's like just that alone is a huge like thing for music to realize like you can change the feel of something just by pushing in a different part of the phrase, but you're playing the same rhythm. It's just you're Should we end this interview and just like turn on some jazz music and just go listen to We're gonna go and chill out now, guys. See you guys around and just listen to.
I remember. I think I played with a drummer out of St. Louis who had studied under Elvin too, and I feel like one of the rules that he carried down was like you're never supposed to use a brush on a cymbal. Like,
well, it just can't be heard. It's not really what it's designed.
Right, it's probably like a no duh moment or something.
Well, it's just. I mean, you might every now and then go shh on something, but that's not. You're not driving rhythmically, helping drive the song now.
Yeah, right.
When you're playing it, when you're going on the ride cymbal, because it's not heard.
Right, exactly.
It's like the ensemble key, you can't descend. So it's the snare drum, being able to like play like just all those crazy flourishes on this. It's just all about the snare drum and the brushes, really. That's what it's about.
And then talking about the kick drum, it just reminded me also of the first time I finally tried to study like how does the reggae rhythm go, because like I'd play drums.
That's another one where it's like
and it's like, and then you discover that the kick is on the 3.
It's on the 3, but then it's randomly dropped on the 1, and every now and then the 2 and 4 gets it,
and it's kicking a side stick.
Right. 1 and 3
rim shot.
Yeah,
which one is that? That's a side stick.
Yeah, but the 2 and 4 is implied via other aspects of the rhythm section. Like it's such a like reggae, and I don't know enough about reggae, so I'm not trying to say I'm some expert and really understand it. But as far as like how it feels to me, it's like it's this thing happening, but they randomly just are changing it and flipping it around, and you're just how did they flip that? Where did that go? And how do they do that? And then you try counting it, and you get lost, and you're like, where are they at? And you come to realize, like after studying some of the stuff, you start going, oh. They're all like internalizing these other rhythms that we don't know. They aren't even being implied. Like the clave is really what they're using, is African claves. They're using a clave. They're not obviously using a clave, but it stems from that West African way of thinking about music, which there's a clave and everything is based around that. No one may be playing the clave, but everyone knows what clave they're listening to and what they're playing to.
Yeah,
the whole group of musicians have internalized that clave.
So one of the things I like to ask guests on the beginning of this podcast too is to share an inspirational quote about getting psyched to hit the studio. And we're talking so much about drumming, and I know you've studied a lot of your favorite drummers. Has there been a drummer, you talked about Elvin, anything that a drummer said that's really inspired you?
That's a hard one.
Something that comes to mind or
I would say I think it's more just like the attitude that some of the guys, like just this openness to creativity. I don't have any direct quotes, but I'd say
what about Max Roach? What was some things?
I'd actually say him? Tony Williams is Tony Williams had much more influence on me as a drummer than Max Roach did. Max Roach was amazing, but I was less into that era of jazz than I was into the era when Tony was like 17, playing with Ron Carter and Tony and Herbie Hancock and Miles Davis. Miles Davis quintet. Yeah. Like that stuff, what Tony does and the way he plays and his attitude towards drumming and music was very interesting because he was about pushing a boundary instead of just playing a part. A lot of drummers, they played their part and they did their thing, and he was more about pushing everyone. Like he had like Miles Davis in his autobiography talked about, it actually is a good quote, like from Miles Davis's thing. Like he goes, man, like I never really thought much about practicing. I didn't really need to practice, And then I get in a band with Tony, and Tony is like, you need to practice more. It's like, this little motherfucker, like 17-year-old punk tell me I need to practice, but he was right. Like, I don't know, I'm not quoting exactly, but that's
awesome.
Not quoting verbatim, but that's in that book. He talks about how Tony pushed him to change as a musician.
Tony was younger than him at that point.
He was 17 years old.
Yeah, that's a trip.
Yeah, he was playing professionally and touring in his jazz band with him at 17. So was Herbie Hancock. Herbie Hancock and Ron Carter was not much older than them. But Herbie and Tony were both like really young when they started playing with them. They were both just like next level musicians, like that the rest of us like will never probably reach technical levels that they were already at the age that they were at.
I don't think I'm going to be reaching those levels myself.
No, and I mean, most of us just have to realize that like what Tony Williams and what Herbie Hancock were at when they were 17, the rest of us may never, just on a technical level, accomplish that. So they were already so connected to the abilities of their instrument, that their instrument's abilities, the abilities that they had on an instrument wasn't in the way. Wasn't getting in the physical aspect of playing an instrument, wasn't getting in the way of their creativity.
Right.
So they were able to push not only playing really high speed, really up tempo swing stuff, but also really complex rhythmic structures and completely improvising it all. It's very similar to like Indian tabla music and raga music, like where it's like there's such a level of operation that they're disconnected from the physical world at some point. Like just like it's just they're floating.
I remember hearing about that. I remember sort of learning about how the great musicians, once they knew their instrument, they wouldn't have to look down. They could play with their eyes closed. They wouldn't have to think about the structure of it. They would just, and I'd want to ask that. I was like, so can you really do you just feel it? And you don't have to think about where your fingers are going to go?
I'm sure that's the
case.
case.
I was so struck by that,
Yeah, not being aware of the actual ability of playing the instrument. It's just playing. Just
expressing.
Yeah, that's where those guys were at. I mean, they were doing it when they were in their late teens, early 20s. These guys were already at that level. And it's the same thing with like Zakir Hussain, who was a tabla player who was playing with Ravi Shankar when he was really young. Like he just was at that level at a super, super young age. Like just a master of the tabla at an age that is just super. And since then, there's been other musicians who in Indian classical music who are like that too. There's this one guy comes to mind. What is his name? I'll think of it later. But
there's, you think about today's culture too, and like the world of Instagram and this idea of, you see these videos of kids who are so young doing incredible stuff. And I feel like there's a question that rises, just like, wow, are kids becoming more advanced at earlier ages now? And hearing you talk about the history of music too, it's sort of like, maybe it's always been happening.
I think kids are more exposed to a wider variety of of music.
That's true.
Because of technology and the internet.
Yeah.
So the cross-pollination of concept and musical ideas is much more fluid now for kids who are 5 years old,
and it's
6
easier
years
to
old.
record yourself and,
and so
self-analyze.
Yeah. Especially I think when your kid is so young, like there isn't so much ego involved. So self-recording isn't such a ego-based thing. It's just like, I'm interested in doing this thing, and wait, let me get better at this. And it's like, kids are when they're learning stuff, it's just quick. And it's not really ego-based, just doing.
I know, it's such a trip.
And that's an amazing thing. And so you can go on YouTube and look up tabla player, Indian kid, and there's some 7-year-old right now in India who's a master almost level of playing of the tabla, which is a really complex instrument and musical system to learn
Even
to play.
Just the counting system for
so
rhythms
complex.
is so bizarre.
I
don't know anything about it.
So non-Western, basically.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Well,
let's get forward a little bit and tell us about your studio now. I mean, like, where are you settled in now making records?
When I'm tracking records, I'm wherever someone's booking me to be, because I don't really have a tracking space yet in my studio. I built myself a mix room because so far in the last 5 years since I've gone more freelance, it's been mostly mixing.
Yeah.
Very, very fortunately, because I love mixing. Mixing is a lot of fun. Because I am somewhat of a space cadet, and I like to get lost in reality, non-reality states of mind, meditative states, whatever you want to call it. Mixing is kind of fun like that because I can like focus on something and play around, sit with the vocals for like an hour and a half or something. And after I've done all the basic busy work of cleaning all the noises up and getting everything smooth sounding, getting rid of things that are a hindrance to the listening process, not necessarily, I'm trying to change any performance things, but, just amps going,
there's a lot of accidentals that get in there that aren't, were never intended to be in there.
Mouth noises, because people sing so close to mics now versus like how Aretha Franklin, go look at photos of Aretha Franklin singing, she's like a foot and a half away from the mic, and you're like, that's why she sounds good. Yeah.
Well, now should we be thanking Billie Eilish for the records that are coming? People are going to be even closer on the mic and quieter, maybe. I don't know.
Well, no one's going to be able to repeat what she did. I mean, there's going to be a whole bunch of people attempting to rehash what she's just got famous for. But like this happens every year, every Grammy year. There's this new, like now there'll be a whole bunch of artists, trying to be Billie Eilish, and that's just going to happen. That's the way it is.
It's a natural thing, and it's a good thing. Yeah, it's part of the copying of art and music that keeps it moving forward.
Yeah, because then hopefully something out of that, or maybe like out of that process, someone will discover they hate doing it that way, and they'll try something else. Yeah, and then they'll be the one putting out something interesting, like next.
And
hopefully,
then down the road, somebody will look back on Billie Eilish's record and go, "Ooh, I'm gonna do that," and it'll be cool all over again.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same. Yeah, it's the same thing when like everybody, if people don't know who the band Suicide is, like how Suicide influenced post-punk and weird
I don't even know
music.
Who the band Suicide is.
Yeah, they're this weird New York City like band that was just like a drum machine, and like it's just all vibe and like kind of like heroin junkie kind of thing. Yeah. That New York City CBGB like late 70s era New York City scene, art music scene, like they were part of that, and their records are really interesting, and the whole vibe of their records are very interesting, and you can hear it in other stuff when you listen to it. You're like, oh, that's
carries through. Yeah. If you're ready to upgrade your studio to the famous sound of API's large format consoles, then you're ready for the Box, a small format console featuring the same analog circuitry and original 2520 op-amp design that has made API famous for 50 years. Record through 8 world-class mic pre-channels, mix through 24 smooth-as-glass faders, and blend mics, analog effects, and parallel compression at the speed of electrons rather than the speed of your computer latency. Upgrade your home studio to legendary status with The Box from APIaudio.com. All right, so let me rewind a little bit and spin this. So you're creating your mix room. I know you have built studios. There's no like you helped Robin Eaton build Club Roar and do these incredible ISO rooms there. Yeah, but you had a chance to sort of start out in the tech shop. What thoughts do you have about the benefit of giving yourself or anybody giving themselves that opportunity to learn how to fix the gear and stuff like that, as opposed to just always being like, I want to be a mixer right now, you know?
Well, I mean, I would say, like, if you are technically inclined, like, it's helpful to have an interest in technical stuff anyways, like to be curious enough to be like, yeah, sure, I want to try to replace the capacitors in this mic preamp or whatever, and or get it fixed or wire it up or whatever. A lot of it came from, the DIY punk world that I lived in with my friend Norm and Dupuis in a studio that we shared together for years, was that, like, we didn't make enough money doing it, recording all these unsigned punk bands and different things. Like, so you had to learn how to wire up the patch bay yourself. You had to figure out why there was a ground loop. You had to figure out why the mixing board wasn't working. You had to spend time figuring that stuff out. I mean, luckily for Norm and his family, like, they're all very smart people, and there's a lot of very mathematical engineering kind of background in everyone. His older brother and his younger brother, I guess, has like a PhD in physics and like data programming and all kinds of, like,
right on.
Yeah, that kind of level of math. Like, his older brother was programming computers when he was in junior high for Michigan State University professors. Like,
maybe we should also just tell the rock stars a little bit more about who Norm is, so because they might not know anything about Atomic Audio.
Yeah, okay. There's this company called Atomic Audio that my friend Norm Drews started a little while ago, and the main thing he started doing was he figured out how to solve the power supply issue for large format consoles. Like, started with the SSL 4K. That some of the he was fixing and repairing SSL 4Ks for people, and these consoles have these really big power supply structures where you have like 2 or 3 power supplies feeding into this changeover unit, which is this massive box full of all these huge bridge rectifiers and capacitors and things. And these things are all running at their top percent of usage. So there's a lot of heat, a lot of electricity being used, and those things can be finicky and just die. Like, during a brownout, you can just blow up the changeover unit, or a power supply can just, so as these consoles are aging, there became a demand for, and Norm saw this, demand for coming up a way of supplying these large consoles with power cleanly, with more efficiency, using modern power supplies, switching power supplies, which everyone was telling him you can't do it because switching supplies are noisy in the high end and they create problems. And you just, all these old guys were just naysayers, like, you can't do it. So he put his effort in and figured it out and came up with a way of being able to supply high current draw on a single rack mount supply that would replace, like in a 96 input console, that would replace 3 or 4 power supplies feeding into a changeover unit, like, and be using 30 or 40, some crazy amount of way less electricity, like,
wow,
from the wall, just the efficiency of the whole thing. And now that's a stable product that Atomic still is making right now, and they've done it for all 9Ks, 4Ks, AMIC 9098s, like Neve consoles, VRs, like all kinds of API consoles. He's done it for all different kinds of consoles, and there's consoles all over the world now who are using the Atomic power supply. So Norm was one of my best friends growing up from my like post high school until his passing away of this year. Like I'd known Norm since then. Like,
and I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's circumstances are, but they are in life. So.
Yeah. And then, so of course I was introduced to him partly because of hearing about the console power supply. And I would say this too, I think for the rock stars listening, where it's like, you might not be into the tech stuff yet and not know what all that means. Until
your console fails in the middle of a session, and then you'll start digging in and
it's
understanding.
It's also just a great reminder, a great insight into just the kind of, brilliance that goes into making all these tools that we just take for granted in the studio all the time.
Yeah, you imagine all the people.
And the advancement and the evolution. And it's like somebody out there put in the time and effort to figure out how to do something that nobody else thought was possible. To get us to the point of just taking it for granted. Yeah. But so I was introduced to the speakers too. And so Powell's and elsewhere. And those sound amazing.
Yeah, and Norm. Yeah, and that's another thing that Norm had been doing for a long time, since like as long as I've known him, he's been tinkering with speakers and learning crossovers, like passive crossovers, and how to slope and create crossovers, and messing around with different really high end Italian drivers. And he's been doing this for years. And he finally started developing speakers that that were starting. No, his focus was creating a studio monitor that could go real loud, like compete with the levels that like a lot of, say, the Detroit hip hop studios that he was fixing SSLs for. These guys who blowing up, Dyne Audio BM13As, blowing up like Adam Audios, like studio speakers that like all these other like off the shelf speakers that people can buy. These people are blowing the woofer drivers up in them like every 3 months or more.
Yeah.
So people are just like,
we're making music for huge subsystems at festivals now.
Yeah, and just the style of music that hip hop is, it requires the bass is right, and most producers who that I worked with, like in studios, need to feel the low end to get into the groove of making the beat they're making and coming up with the production that they're working on. So if these guys, a lot of these guys have home studios too, and they're not in big rooms with big, huge Augsburger mains all the time. Maybe they are a part of their process, but not the whole time. So Norm, through trial and error over the years of working with these different producers, like Mr. Porter, he had designed several systems for Mr. Porter Productions, or Mr. Porter, Denon Porter. And he did some speakers for Carl Craig at one point. Like he had been tinkering with all these different speakers, and he had come up with a design that could handle a decent amount of pummeling and put out a really good amount of volume cleanly with very low distortion, like, at high volumes, and be in a decent sized package. It wasn't a huge speaker. And that was the 610, which is something that Atomic still sells, Atomic 610, which is, there's quite a few guys in town now here in Nashville who are using them, who swear by them because they are really interestingly accurate in all the ways you need them to be accurate.
Yeah, I think Bobby Holland talked about it.
Bobby Holland has I mean, Craig Alvin has a pair. There's quite a few people have a pair who really like, once you get used to the way the mid-range sounds in them, like how low distortion the mid-range is and how unforgiving they are in some ways, in the sense that it's giving you accurately what's going on. Like if there's like weird frequencies that are resonating that are painful, like they're not mulling that over, softening that area up. It's like you can tell that there's something wrong in your mix. So it forces you to, I think like Norm and I both agree that there's a lot of speakers out on the market nowadays that have a very DSP process sound to them. I'm not going to name any brands, but they sound kind of like non-dimensional. They don't sound like the sound is really coming out of it. Doesn't sound dynamic. It sounds almost like there's limiters and multi-band compressors or something going on in some of these speakers, where you turn them up and you're just like, it just doesn't pop out of the speakers like music that should.
Right.
Like you listen to music that should have movement to it. It doesn't feel like that does.
Yeah. That's interesting. It's almost like some of those speakers designs or we've gotten used to accepting that this studio monitoring situation mimics the kind of consumer end result that that this is going to end up being heard on anyway somehow.
Yeah, but it made speakers like that. From my experiences, they make me make bad decisions.
Right.
When either tracking something or
I got no problem making bad decisions. I
don't need anything else. So my mantra has been like the most accurate, low distortion, linear speaker system you can use. Something that has the least amount of phase shift from the lowest frequency to the highest frequency, which is really important. Talk about that.
What does that mean when people talk about phase shift? I mean, somebody might look at that and go,
phase
I don't understand
timing.
that. It's like, maybe I understand phase.
Everyone thinks of the polarity.
How does the waveform going into the speaker get shifted somehow between different frequencies?
Well, let's separate the difference. And there's other people out here who are listening to this that are probably going to be like, and there's going to be some stupid banter argument probably on a Reddit or something someday about this. And there probably already is. But phase is not the polarity switch on your mixing board. That is not called phase shift. That is called a polarity flip. That is simply flipping where the waveform starts its first peak. Is it high or low on, if you're looking at a waveform? Is it at the top above the 0 point crossing point? Is it below? Is the first transient part of the waveform starting below the 0 point axis or Is it starting the negative or is it starting the positive? It's starting the positive that's in polarity. True polarity, not phase. Phase is not polarity. Phase is time related. Phase has to do with the time something is reaching you. So 2 speaker components like a tweeter and a mid driver can be out of time at a certain frequency point. And if those 2 drivers' timing factors, phase relationship, are wrong, along with the crossover relationship, you can get phase irregularities, which are usually cancellations or boosts, and which are basically nonlinear distortions between the 2 drivers.
Yeah, calming effects.
It just like creates distortions that create a smearing in the information, the transient initial wavefront of all those frequencies, So at the crossover point, if your crossovers aren't designed correctly, if the time alignment of your drivers isn't really thought out right, it can cause distortions and cause things to sound not be able to hear point source information out of a pair of speakers, not be able to hear center imaging correctly and clearly and hear depth of field and all these things. DSP speakers, there's a few that out there, and I don't name any because I'm not selling anything for anyone, but there's a few companies doing some stuff that is pretty amazing with DSP, and they're doing a good job of it. But I think for myself and just what I can afford and what I'm into, and what Norm ended up working for me, he designed me a custom pair of 3-way near fields. I have a low driver, a mid dome driver, and a tweeter, and that speaker sounds great. And he really figured it out. And and when you look at it on a phase plot, when you use a sweep and look at the phase versus frequency information, it's no more than plus or minus 12 degrees of phase to the whole phase response.
Well, that's going to be a whole nother discussion because I've never understood the phase graph.
If you look at a phase versus frequency graph, like a lot of speakers will have a certain point where it's just, it goes like way out of phase, like 40 to 80 dB out of phase at certain frequency points. And it's just like, and that's not the room. I mean, the room also causes, and we'll talk about room acoustics a little bit too. Room acoustics also can cause these things. But if you're measuring outside, just how Norm would do it because he doesn't have an anechoic chamber, but just outside is anechoic other than the ground. So
right, exactly. Yeah, good point. All right, so we'll take a break for just a sec.
Yeah.
This is awesome stuff, dude. Rockstars, we'll come back in just a moment for the jam session. Reminder that I've got links to Collin's amazing sounding records in the show notes. Just scroll through, click right over to the blog post, and you can go check out his Bandcamp links. And also, I've got video links so you can go listen to this stuff on YouTube or what have you. And we'll see you guys in just a minute for the jam session. You know what it feels like when inspiration hits and you want to capture your great song idea, but then the studio gets in the way and it's just no fun anymore. Wouldn't it feel awesome if you could simplify the process of producing your music from inspiration to final masterpiece? PreSonus Studio One is a powerful digital audio workstation that helps you compose your music with a complete collection of virtual instruments for keyboards and drums, MIDI tools for hip-hop, EDM, and film, a flexible sketch pad with chord charts and key recognition for songwriting and arranging, and classic effects pedals and amp simulators for guitar and bass. With 37 high-quality effects plugins, integrated Melodyne, and drag and drop flexibility, you can easily edit and polish your mixes. And Studio One is the only DAW with a built-in mastering studio so that you can take your record from writing to radio ready all in one place. Download your free version of Studio One Prime and get started now at PreSonus, wherever sound takes you. If you're using a Mac in your recording studio and you're tired of feeling like the studio setup you worked so hard to create is becoming obsolete too quickly, then Otherworld Computing is the solution for you. OWC can help keep your existing Mac and studio current and relevant so that you can make great music. Whether you need to upgrade your RAM, install an SSD, add more connectivity, or simply find a great used Mac, you can get the most mileage out of your studio with OWC. Offering a vast library of DIY install videos, 24/7 friendly support, and free shipping in the US on most items over $49, there's no need to get frustrated when you can achieve the speed to create and the capacity to dream at OWC.com. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Collin Dupuis, joining us here at the studio. We're going to dig into this so much. I don't even know where we're going because, Collin, you just have so many amazing stories about everything. But we were just talking about microphones a little bit.
Hey, let's talk about equipment a little bit, just so we can give the listeners a little bit of my opinion, of course, about equipment, because this is like just...
Why not?
This whole show's about opinion.
Recording with gear, right?
This is...
But, I was talking about you asking about my console, and I mentioned that I had put Phantom Power on it, and you said like, oh yeah, no idea, Phantom Power.
Up until a certain point, not until like someone started, I don't know what time in history they started deciding to put the Phantom Power at the mixing board with a switch you would choose to turn Phantom Power on for a microphone, but they definitely did not have that in the 60s. That did not exist. I don't even remember
that on the...
in the 60s or maybe even the early 70s.
We had a Neve 8068 at Woodland when I interned there. I don't remember there being a Phantom Power switch. No, I think it was the outboard racks and gear started...
It was before that. I mean, they started... I don't know if it was SSL or someone at some point started requesting it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, like someone started requesting needing Phantom at the board because they had tracking with the boards, but like...
how did they? I mean, they had condenser mics.
Yeah. So for example, would be like using a board like one of my favorite, which is Spectrasonics. Like shout out there to Spectrasonics, who is still around, and they make some of the best equipment that was ever made.
Mic preamps, right next to me.
Their mic preamps, like that 1020 series console, which was what the new Spectrasonics modules they sell in 500 series are exactly what was the 1020 console. Like once I heard that stuff, I started. So I went and bought myself a bunch of channel strips of it. So I'm building myself a couple sidecars, and I have. But anyways, so say you were operating a mixing board in a studio, and this is 1968 or 1972 or something, right? And you were tracking onto a 2-inch 16 track, the most recent technology. You were probably mixing on a mixing board that had anywhere from 20 to maybe 28 mic preamps in it, and 8 or 16 buses, depending on what kind of tape machine you had. If you had a 1-inch 8 track or a 2-inch 16 track, you had that many buses because that's just how everyone recorded. No one had outboard mic preamps sitting in racks. Everyone used the board preamp. They routed it with a bus switch to a channel onto a multi-track. And if you were recording a string section and you had 6 mics set up, you were summing all 6 mics to stereo on the 2-inch 16 track. And that was it.
But if they weren't focused on choosing which was the perfect mic preamp for recording, what were they focused on during making
music
records?
And performance? The musical performance. Who was performing and how the microphone they had in front of it was sounding.
Wait, you're saying they weren't focused on making edits on the computer the whole time?
No. I mean, people were using razor blades and chopping things together. There was still stuff like that going on. But they weren't pining over what mic preamp, and I'm not saying mic preamps don't change the sound. They absolutely do. But if you were to walk into Record Plant in 1972, East or West Coast, or any of the other, any of the other really great studios that were booked 24/7, making really amazing records by all kinds of people, or Larrabee or like any of the studios that were like big time rooms, Wally Hyder's studio, any of those places, there was a mixing board and there was buses. And they would change their mixing board out as technology developed. Like, oh, we have a 2-inch 16 track, so now we need a mixing board of 16 buses, because as an engineer, it makes the most amount of sense to have your signals flowing into one source, the board. You're sitting in the center of the speakers. You can press a button and you can commit things. You can say like, oh, well, we got to record we got this like disco track and we got this thing. We got to get this certain kind of drum sound. We got to do it. So like, but it's a date. We got like horns. We got background vocals. We got like, like percussion section. We got all these things we got to do overdubs on for the song to make it happen. Well, the drum set now is on 3 tracks or 4 tracks, not 6 or 27 tracks like it is nowadays, or more like 18 to 27 tracks that it is when you get a Pro Tools session.
Right.
So engineers back then were tracking and committing to the drum sound onto kick and snare on separate tracks so they could bounce the kick and snare in the track. And then the overhead or the stereo drum would be overheads, closed tom mics, possibly some other textural mic if they were doing that. It was all being committed to that stereo blend. Sometimes, the most of the sound in a lot of those records like is probably from that stereo blend. Like the kick and snare is a part of it, but like, and they were probably, okay, if they were using compression on drums, which they probably weren't because the drummers are really good, if they were using compression, they were putting maybe a 1176 on the kick drum just to even it out a little bit. Right. Maybe you got a drummer who's not as good that day or who's too dynamic with the kick drum. And they put maybe an 1176 and probably take a couple dB off of it, keep it in spot a little bit, maybe a DBX 160. That was a newer thing out. I don't even know if in the early 70s if that was a new thing at that point. Like, when did that come out?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
I'm not sure. But I'm just saying, like, so they were committing to horn sections, string sections, all these recording dates were being done down to tape with a mixing board, a mic preamps, and the mics on the floor using the buses of the board, and that's it. And you got really good at being a really good engineer, using your ear and knowing what you needed. And so to lead back to the phantom power thing, what we really got me on this tangent is that all the microphones back then were dynamic mics, ribbon microphones, velocity microphones, or
tube mics, right?
Tube mics or solid state condensers. But solid state condensers coming from the Neumann factory were supplied with the phantom power box supply that came with the microphone.
Oh, that's a
trip. When you bought a FET 47.
We're already used to it. We would have already had a power supply for the tube mic.
Or if you had a U87, it came from Neumann, it came with a phantom power supply box. Like,
what's funny is an engineer probably would have looked at you funny if it didn't come with phantom power. They'd be like, where's the
supply box?
The tube mic has a box. Where's the box for this mic?
So I guess the reason why I think that is a good idea still to this day is because I've experienced enough times where phantom power is living on a patch-based system and it causes problems. Not only does it cause problems for people who aren't paying attention and are cross-patching their ribbon mics and bending the ribbon in their ribbon mic because it sends an AC waveform, DC into a transformer, creates an AC waveform that feeds back through the transformer of the ribbon mic and pushes an AC pulse into the ribbon and bends it, puts it out of whack, removes its tension, makes it floppy, whatever.
So that's
just by cross-patching in a patch way. No, if the phantom's living on a mic preamp and you say like, oh, now I want to use the ribbon mic that's there on this mic preamp, but the phantom power's turned on and you cross-patch. By cross-patching and by going across ground, like 48 volts going across the two pins of the signal, sends a DC voltage to that transformer, then turns that transformer then turns that into an AC waveform of however many millivolts, which is enough to make that.
And this is if the phantom power was on when you patch or don't patch the
but it's,
patch in or unpatch the
on the patch bay, So
if you turn your phantom off when you're using ribbon mics, you're safe or not safe, you think?
No, you're safe. Yeah. If you like turn the phantom off, waited for it to power down, because you got to remember a phantom power supply has capacitors in it, and it's going to take up to 30 seconds or more for it to chill out before that 48 volts isn't sitting there. It doesn't just turn off like a switch. It goes.
Yeah. When I built my power supply, I measured that when I was testing it. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, whoa, you need to wait 30 seconds before you use this with a ribbon.
Yeah. And that's, and so that to me, whenever I've wired a lot of studios too, like that was kind of the way of making money, like was going in wiring a studio. Like if I could convince the person who owns a studio to let me help them disable the phantom power on the mic preamps and help them figure out a way of creating phantom power that was out on the floor for all their microphones that have phantom, because not all their microphones have phantom and need phantom. Only the condensers that are solid state need a phantom supply. Like convince them to go that route, then there'll never be a chance that a visiting engineer or an assistant engineer or even themselves could cross patch and flatten out or mess up one of their ribbon mics, and or it avoids that really, really terrible thing that happens with 48 volts is the fact that you could probably, if you're patching a mic and a live headphone feed where the tracks are armed and you make the mistake of not doing that, and there's a musician sitting with their headphones on in the live room and you cross pat 48 volts onto a mic preamp that has 60 or 70 dB of gain on it, that 48 volt cross patch on a 60 dB gain is going to be louder than anything they've heard ever. And as a possibility, you may create permanent hearing damage in your musician. So having 48 volts on a patch bay is bad in those two reasons. A microphone's damage, you could possibly hurt someone's hearing, also the idea that if there's a patch cable that's not patched completely and that 48 volts is living on the ground plane, and if there's a ground bus bar in the patch bay where that 48 volts now is leaking out across all the shielding of all your cables, and you have an unbalanced signal someplace in this patch system, now there's 48 volts living on an unbalanced patched thing, and now there's this high frequency buzz happening, and everyone's like, where the hell is this high frequency buzz coming from? If someone is not very smart with patching and they're new and they're an intern or young, just new to the whole thing of how to patch signal, and they patch a 48 volt onto your converter, you now just fried the input or output driver chip of your converter because it's not meant to handle 48 volts DC on it.
Yep.
So
because you're going into a mic input of some mic pre.
Just if someone patched it wrong, if they just weren't paying attention, they went one row down, and that happens to be the Pro Tools input number 17.
Right.
But
you just
it's 48 volts
by accident.
You just fried that chip possibly.
Yeah.
It may not, but it could very easily.
Well, I know that Dangerous Audio master section I have, it specifically says like it has very sensitive inputs because they designed it to be like
distortion
there's nothing
free
between you and the
distortion
input of
free,
this thing.
Yeah.
But if you accidentally like even shock it or something, it can destroy one of the
because the op amp chips are balanced buffer drivers or discrete ones that he's designed that are sensitive to
So be careful with
I have
I
have multiple reasons why I think it's a really bad idea to have 48 volts living on a patch base.
All right, dig it. All right.
All
right.
If anybody wants to get ask me in more details, they can email me and go to my website, and
nice.
I have a contact form that's just directly to me that has nothing to do with hiring me. It's just like, you had a question, ask me a question. I'll give you my best answer.
Go ahead and tell me your email address right now if you want.
My email address, my professional email address is Dupuis, DUPUISPRO @gmail.com.
All right, cool. And that link will be in the show notes too, Rockstars, so don't sweat it. If you want to capture every nuance of a great performance in your studio, then you're going to need to start with a microphone that is crafted with great care and attention to detail. JZ Mics in Riga, Latvia designs amazing sounding microphones that are handcrafted with jeweler's precision to bring you incredible detail in your recordings. At the heart of JZ microphones is the unique Golden Drop capsule design, which uses a lighter, faster diaphragm that delivers great clarity and fidelity while avoiding distracting colorations and distortions. This is my voice right now on the new Amethyst microphone with Class A discrete amplifier circuitry, extremely low self-noise, and advanced built-in shock mount technology to bring an expensive sound to your studio for an affordable price. JZ offers a 5-year warranty, free shipping to the US, and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Plus, for a limited time, you can use the coupon code ROCKSTARS to get 50% off the Amethyst microphone at jzmic.com. During the height of record making, Tom Dowd, Muscle Shoals, Stax Studios, Ardent Studios, and the New York City record plant all turned to one company to build their consoles. That company is now Spectra 1964, carried on today through Bill Cheney and Jim Romney. The extremely stable, high-speed circuit design of the 101 amplifier provides unequaled headroom, low noise, and linear output irrespective of transient audio peaks, giving you cleaner, punchier, dynamic recordings. Spectra 1964 brings you the sound of ZZ Top, Aerosmith, Bruce Springsteen, King Crimson, John Lennon, and so many more. Created by the missile engineers who were central in rolling out the systems that protected the free world for over half a century, Spectra 1964 literally brings rocket science to your studio. With the STX 600 mic pre with built-in comp limiter, full-frequency passive BBDI, and C610 dedicated comp limiter, start making records that last a lifetime at Spectra1964.com. All right, so I'm just going to jump straight to drums, dude.
Whatever you want.
Your drum sounds are killer, man.
On recordings?
Yeah, on all the records you sent. Particularly some of the ones that really stood out to me on your band, Zoos of Berlin. It sounded like you really explored a variety of sounds which is pretty exciting. And I wrote down 3 different song titles, and I thought maybe we could just go through and talk about how you get those drum sounds.
Yeah, sure.
So some of the answers might be like, oh, dude, that's a drum machine. I don't know. But
some of it is probably, there's definitely drum machine stuff going on.
Yeah, but we want to know how you got them anyway. So was it Ambition?
Ambition Sounds?
Yeah, Ambition Sounds. Tell us about recording that song. What do you remember about that? And what do you remember about any of those sounds?
And
if you don't remember that one,
I'm playing the drums on that stuff. If it's live drums, there's programmed drums. It's a combination of all of us like kind of playing around with it. Like Trevor or Daniel will come with a demo that'll have stuff in it, and they sometimes will have very, very hashed out demos, and then we'll flip it around and play
like
with it.
Analog tape. I mean, it sounds pretty analog. A lot of this stuff too.
We haven't recorded analog tape ever.
Really?
Yeah,
man.
No, most of the last 10 years of recordings I've done, other than like the Dr. John record, all of the other records I've worked on, maybe the Dr. John, there's like 3 or 4 records I did with Dan Auerbach where it actually went to tape. Everything else never touched tape.
Wow. All right, great. Because your records consistently sound like, oh man, I need to go get a tape machine so that I can sound as cool as this.
That's just kind of go. So like, for instance, like Zuzer Berlin stuff, like there's real minimal, the recording setup we use is very minimal. It's like a converter system. Like I think we may be using the Metric Halo 2882 at that point for that record. That's what I owned at the point. The Firewire interface had 2 of those. That's
the one where the ad would be like the dude with the laptop out on a mountaintop recording his bongo or something like that.
Basically, in some sense, I don't know if I had my laptop at that point or if I had a Mac. I think Mac Mini. It was a combination of stuff, and then we used Logic Pro to do the tracking because it was easy for everyone else to have Logic Pro.
Right, in a band situation.
Totally. So we could all share the sessions and everyone could work on overdubs on their own and mess around with effects and things and then present it to the final product. And then I can go through it and go, okay, everyone's committed to this, and I put it in Pro Tools and work on the mix because I'm more comfortable inside the Pro Tools environment just because I'm so used to it.
And are you the enginear, the default engineer in that band?
Yeah. Like they all have learned how to engineer. Like we have the studio space that we share together in Detroit, and like I left a bunch of my equipment there because like I don't need all this equipment here with me in Nashville. So like I have an ADM 16-channel ADM board, which is Audio Design Manufacturing, which was out of Michigan, Roseville, Michigan. It's mostly broadcast stuff, but it's discrete API, transformer style, like op amp scenario. So it's really vibe and a lot of texture and lots of good, sound coming through those things. So that and like, Distressor and LA3A, some cool old Presto tube mic preamps from tape machines, like early Presto stuff, and some other pieces of gear like that, like some other Bogan Presto tube mic preamps and some Pi. I have a Pi mixer there and a Altec 1567A and a Spectrasonics 1100 portable mixer, like some of those different cool little. So I taught those guys how to patch stuff and how signal flow works, and so they could work on stuff when I wasn't around. And
so you guys are recording into Logic. You're not really using tape so much.
No, the sounds is just from the process of going. Like sometimes stuff maybe a drum machine would go, like Trevor would put something onto a cassette tape first.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
On his 4-track.
That's cool.
He may have done that before he put it in, and then chopped it up. Before he chopped up, he may have took his Lin drum or whatever he has and put that into a cassette, and then put that into Logic, and then we chop it up.
What's a cool way to do that? So for the rock stars, if they want to start experimenting with that, so I guess a starting sound is cool to like send a cassette, and then because you're going to build everything else off that.
There's no point of the process where you can't do that. It's just about understanding how to get it back in time.
Yeah. So what are some good tips for treating our sounds? Because I feel like most of us need to get bolder about getting the sound out of Pro Tools into something cool and bringing it back in.
Yeah. It's just about how much latency the whole system creates, right? So if you're doing it on a cassette 4-track, obviously you don't have a separate playback head, so you can't do it in real time. You have to transfer it on, rewind, and play it back in. Well, how are you going to line all that back up? I mean, you could sit there and mess around with nudging it, or you could be smart about it and put some kind of transient. I would say use a 1K or even a whatever square wave, something that you can generate in Pro Tools, but you commit it to a track. So like open a audio track, put the test tone generator on it, set it to 1K or 500 hertz, set square wave, select a small area. You can do commit, or you can bounce it down, however you want to do it to get it so that that square wave lives as an actual audio file on a track. And then you put that slide that square wave little transient, this little block of information down onto the track, the beginning of whatever track that is being transferred onto the tape. Further down, more in the beginning, or it could be in the end, but it's easier if it's in the beginning. Like before the song starts. Like if you, that's the other reason why when you guys are creating songs, always start and give yourself 8 bars to 16 bars of blank space in the beginning of the session.
Right. So you got room to mess around with stuff.
Yeah. So you have this intro period of time code or MIDI clock or whatever you're using for syncing, or just space to do what I'm about to finish explaining you. Like you have space to play with. You have space to add intro ambient information that feeds into the song.
Yeah, because it turned out the beginning of your song sucked and now we need to fix it.
Yeah, or you just have room to mess with it, to try things out like this. And if you're starting right at the top of the song, right at the top of the session, then you have nothing to start with, and it just goes boom right from the downbeat, and then you can't do what I'm explaining.
I kind of hate that about DAW designs, that they go like, they do a 1, 2, 3, 4 countdown, and then they drop you into record at the beginning.
Yeah, instead of dropping you in at 4 bars in. I'm sure you can. There's offsets, and none of us want to pre-program.
Yeah, we never learned what they are.
I just start recording way further down. Like even when I open up start a song with somebody and it's live band tracking, I just go boom someplace randomly and just start going from there. So I have this, so that like it's on the timeline. So anyways, back to what I was saying. So now you have this square wave information. It's a square wave. It has polarity and all the things it needs in there. So that is now your time reference point. So you can take that thing. So that ends up needing to be recorded onto the tape along with everything after it gets dumped onto tape. That whole thing gets dumped onto tape. You fly that back in, play it back into Pro Tools, record it onto its own new track, and then you line up that square wave information exactly. You make it so that it is exactly the same spot. That's all you need to do.
So you're talking about you've got a track of tape that is audio, but you've got another track of tape that's just that square wave.
No, you're just putting this little bleep, like a beep.
Oh, right, at the beginning of it, right? Yeah,
of the beginning. Cool. So it's just this goes beep of 1K or beep of 500 or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you zoom in on it, it's a square wave.
Yep.
Don't use 10K because converters can't do 10K square waves. They've rounded off and it looks weird.
The old hand clap trick?
You can do, or you can do a transient if you want to.
But we wouldn't have a hand clap because we're sending something from Pro Tools out to the tape.
The reason why I say use a square wave is because you can use any kind of transient thing you want.
Click sound.
You can use a click sound. It doesn't matter what you use really. I just use square waves because it allows you to look at how many.
You're also a little bit of a super genius, so it's like it's more super geniusy that way.
I've learned a little bit about technical, so like aligning tape machines and using tones and stuff like that. But so yeah, it doesn't have to be a square wave. It can be a transient thing. It can be the click from the click track, but it has to be an audio file first for you to be able to move it down to the track of the thing you're going to, because what you're doing is you're recording it on a tape and you're flying it back in and you're lining the thing you flew back in up to the one that is on the track that you played it from.
The source of where the click came from.
Yeah.
So the click can't just be like the click plugin in Pro Tools. You'd want to put that click on, commit it to an audio track.
You could either commit it, record it through a bus, or you could, so allows you to like then take this thing you've dumped back, recorded back in from the tape, and then slide it and line those exact transients up visually so that they're totally dead on. And if you can get it down to the sample and it's totally dead on, then the tape process can be blended back in to the original source and not cause comb filtering. If you're off it even the smallest amount and it's not right on, there'll be obvious comb filtering, which might be a cool effect. You might like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, imagine a cassette's, the speed is varying.
It's moving, so there's going to be a
really cool effect.
Yeah, that might be a cool effect, but at least it's somewhat lined back up and where your low end isn't disappearing. That's mainly your goal is like, for me, is like if you're using tape and you want a kick drum to really happening, if your phase is off on that bounce thing, the low end's going to be
So we're doing
wrong.
The tape thing and then blending it back with the original kick drum to like
maybe the drums sound best. Maybe you take 3 of the tracks and you're sending them out that one output bus to the tape because maybe you want the kick and snare to sound super maxed out on tape and it creates a sound. I mean, maybe you're running through this like other mumbo jumbo box of some sort, some box you have.
Oh, I love the mumbo jumbo box.
You have because I don't want to say like you need to use a compressor, and this compressor, maybe it's some kind of unit rack mount unit, some kind of little cheap thing, guitar pedals, like whatever you can think of.
It's whatever you got around the studio. Just listen to all of them until you find out what they all sound like.
And how they affect the sound. And so tape isn't the only thing. Because if you are using tape, you can't do it in real time. And even if you do it in real time through a compressor, you have input and output latency of your converter. So you have a certain amount of actual real latency that happens via an D to A, and you have real latency that happens from A to D. There's just no way around it. That's the way conversion works.
Yeah.
There's no latency. There's no zero latency in conversion. It doesn't work that way. There's super low latency where companies claim we have this much latency, round trip latency, but it's not zero samples.
What about latency compensation? So
delay compensation is very accurate when it's working properly. Sometimes Pro Tools will just be weird. That's
why you got to train your ear. You got to know what things are right or wrong.
And you got to just be aware, that something's going to be out of time. So if you're just running through an analog device and it's going right back in, you're still going to need that transient thing I talked about to allow you to line it right back up so that you can actually, so if you are really mashing something through a thing and you want to blend it in like a super distorted thing on your vocal and you want to blend it back in, you got to get the phase really close, the timing, the phase of it really close, or it'll comb filter and could be a chorusing effect that you might like, and it might be something that's completely bad sounding. But why do that to yourself? Why not just make it right on? And so you have this reference point. So you have to have that transient information reference point to be able to line stuff back in time. And that's all you really need to know how to do. Like you do that and you get used to that process. And I don't know if I haven't looked on YouTube to see if anybody has an instruction how to do this.
I don't know. I talk about it some on the podcast, and I do it all the time for my multi-track tape machine, but it's got a playback head, so I can actually do it in real time and things like that. But it's just such a great trick, and it's such an amazing discovery.
It is.
When you start taking sounds off your tape, off your Pro Tools, and through stuff and back in, and you're like, oh my God, that sounds so cool. I can't get that sound with the plug-in, necessarily.
You can get a sound with a plug-in. Now, can you get that? Probably not. But that's the whole thing is like, I look at plugins as just another processing device. I threw out the window a little while ago the idea that I'm trying to emulate any outboard equipment or tape. With
the whole analog versus digital
I don't
thing was
view it that way.
Eventually, you're like, who cares?
I
analog
view it
plus digital.
I view it as just another thing to do. That's another process. So I'm very much in the box mixer most of the time now, just because a lot of it has to do with the budgets are so shrunk on making records that you don't have time to dump all of the multi-tracks into tape and back.
Those are production decisions now.
Well, they should be. Like if someone's like, can we get a more tape thing? Did you record it on your tape? And why are you sending it to me, not recorded on your tape yet? Like, like you're sending me to mix it. Like I'm not here to produce your record for you. Like, let's have that. And that's the other thing is like it's really good to have open communication with the artists and clients that you're working with as to what they're expecting from you as a person and what your part of the job is. Like, so you can understand what they're expecting from you. And then you can have a conversation as to how much time you think that's going to take. If they're expecting you to tune their vocals and fix the timing of their drummer and fix the timing of their bass player and their guitar player or whatever, like do actual production stuff, but you're being hired to mix the record, there needs to be an understanding that that's not what you understand that you're doing.
Yeah, it's like hiring somebody to paint your house and then you're talking to them about the architectural design and you're like, they want...
Yeah, you're like, wait, I'm just here to paint your house.
Yeah, I'm just here to paint your house. What do you mean you don't have a house built yet?
Yeah. It's like, so it's really important to develop a real clear conversation with your clients. And so you're not left in the dark about what you're doing. And so they're not left in the dark as what you are going to be providing for them, because what can happen is that, if you're not communicating things clearly to them, you're going to spend a lot of time like having unnecessary conversations with them, and someone's going to get mad at you and you may even burn a bridge or something because like, you thought that you were mixing or you thought you were doing this thing. Like, for instance, maybe you thought you were doing production work on it and then that wasn't communicated that you weren't. You were just being hired to engineer. Right?
Yeah.
And so like you're in the studio trying to communicate production ideas, and they're like, who is this guy? Why is this guy talking? Like, so.
What's your discovery process for that? I mean, how do you?
I just talk to the artist. I mean, if people come to me now, because they want to do something specific with me. So I go, okay, what do you guys want me to do? And so I'm real frank with it, in a non-rude way. Just it's very like forthcoming. Like, what is it you expect me to do?
Right, and sometimes they don't know how to describe what's expected, and so sometimes you find yourself educating them, right?
Yeah, just use examples. So I'll say, as an example, if we're in a studio together and we've gotten drum sounds and got things set up, and then we're working on the song, and we've come to a conundrum of it just doesn't feeling right. There's something lacking or something missing. Maybe it's an overdub. Maybe it's just like, and I feel the necessity to say, like, why don't we try an overdub? Why don't we try running this through this? Why don't we try using a tape machine to pitch the whole song up a half step and see what it feels like? Very speeding it, changing the pitch of everything and the pitch of the drums and see what it sounds like. That's what happens if we do a half step up, like with a tape machine, not us playing it again a half step up, but like literally, or a whole step up, and see what happens and it speeds it up. And so that's production. So then if you guys are open for me being involved in that, then you're asking me to help you also co-produce the process, which is now like a different conversation as to like how much I am taking on my responsibility.
Yeah.
Because what can happen is like of course it's helpful to make suggestions, and it's helpful to help the process along, but it's real easy to make people uncomfortable when they aren't expecting you, or they don't want you to have an opinion about any creative stuff other than what you're being hired for, which is to make stuff sound good.
Especially if you're an intern.
Well, okay. To all you out there who are learning how to do this and you've been hired as a runner or an intern, don't talk ever in a session. Seriously. You will get so much more out of the process. I'm not being mean. I'm saying you will learn so much more if you leave your phone in the car, or leave your phone out of the room. Don't ever look at it.
Just go get it for recall photos.
No, literally have your phone for when you're out to run and get food, or when you've run to do something that's not in the room. But if you're in the control room, you're in the studio, and you're looking at your phone, even if everyone in the band is on their phone, and you're looking at your phone, you're losing the opportunity to learn from the process. You have now disconnected yourself from what's going on in the room, and you're looking at a social media feed, or you're checking your email, or whatever it is you're doing, texting your friend about what you're going to do when you bro down later on after you get out of this session. You now are not involved anymore, and you might as well not be in the room, because you aren't paying attention. If you're not paying attention, you're not learning anything.
What's funny,
shut your brain off from learning at that point in time. Even if it's 30 seconds, there may be some really important little micro communication that happened between the producer and the lead singer. That was a look.
The
singer gave the producer, and you weren't looking at that. You weren't paying attention. You just lost that. You just lost that experience, and you won't ever gain that back. So you're that much further behind on your game of being better at this. If you're not paying it, if you're paying attention, you're going to be way further along in the curveball. All the other people who want to do this gig.
It would be hard to describe in one sentence what gives records a legendary sound, but it would be easy to describe in 3 letters: API. For more than 50 years, API Audio has created large format consoles for world-class studios. Famous for co-founder Saul Walker's circuit designs and the original 2520 op-amp, the sound of API consoles is the sound of great music. API now brings that legendary sound to your home studio with the Box, a small format console featuring the famous API circuitry that is the perfect analog addition for your digital studio. The Box gives you 8 recording channels on the left with built-in mic pre's, high-pass filters, direct inputs, and custom loadable 500 module slots, and 16 summon humming channels on the right, or mix using all 24 channels, including aux sends, inserts, and silky smooth faders, feeding a master section with classic API compression, switchable monitor sends, and a Pro TalkBack switch, and you've just upgraded your studio to legend status with The Box from APIaudio.com. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Want to start mastering your own records? Rockstars of Mastering walks you through exactly how I mastered my own record using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. Want to learn how to create a mix that doesn't suck but rocks instead? At Mixmaster Bundle, I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins so that you can have punchy, powerful drums, guitars that rock, bass you can feel, and a mix that is in your face. Plus, it's totally free as my way of saying thanks for listening. Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now and look for the clickable link in the show notes below. There's always something to be learning. So like, even if it looks
constantly,
like, you know, even if I'm watching you, Collin, and you're doing the same thing over and over again, and
it
like
seems
nobody's saying
mundane
anything,
and repetitive, like
it's like, why don't you just look at what are Collin's fingers doing?
Or
like,
just,
what button does he keep pushing, and why does he keep pushing that button?
If you're paying attention to the sound that's happening, like if I'm doing some micro amount of adjustment of some sound, and I'm just using myself as an example, or some other engineers making a small adjustment to the sound of something, but it's enough of a drastic thing that it's affecting the mood. Well, how do they do that? Well, you don't go run up and ask them right then, because that's just what, common sense. You don't interrupt the flow, but you make a note and go, I noticed you did something on the drums at this moment in time, and it's this song, and you write it down on your pad of paper. Hopefully you have a pad of paper if you're an intern and you're paying attention, you're making notes, and you're having questions that you can ask later of the engineer or whoever after everyone's gone. You can pick their brains, and you have actual questions to ask that are focused on what was going on. Now you're learning. You're in school. Like, why are you in this room? You're in school the whole time you're in a recording studio. I'm always in school. Even though I'm being hired to be the engineer on a record, I'm still in school. I'm like still learning. I'm like, I'm learning other small micro things that aren't like the snare drum and how I get the snare drum sound. It's how are the people relating?
Yeah, and you talked about, was it, you know what that is, right?
Bump that thing, yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
that's the tape machine there. Was it Tony Williams? Was that the drummer you were talking about before? Yeah, so you made the example of like the younger guy teaching something, and that's
teaching
one of
the younger
things,
guy, like you're always there learning.
I love it when I get a chance to learn from somebody who's younger than me too.
Yeah, especially if they know something that I don't.
Yeah, and they know a lot of things I don't.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm not trying to discount any new person who's young guy or gal who wants to be an intern, and that they don't already have a lot of knowledge in a certain aspect or techniques in some software or whatever. But you still have to know your place in the situation you're in. You're there to learn. There's things that you don't know, and you're not
going to learn if you're trying to show people what you do know.
Yeah, and you're definitely going to get a lot more out of the situation, being that like you're a fly on the wall. No one ever notices you at all, except for when you're there when they need something from you. But you've noticed everyone else, and you're picking up on all these small micro things that are happening, which are mostly the human relationship things, which are the big part of how sessions go awry, is when people are messing up that psychological stuff and not doing it right. Good producers and good engineers are really good at keeping everything really calm, or keeping things exciting, or going with the flow. Now, the other thing that's really important as an engineer is to just go, okay, whatever you want. Like maybe you even completely disagree with it, but trying it, trying what someone tries out. Like I do this all the time now. I will get a mix, I'll send a mix, and I'm like, this mix is great. I love the way this mix. And I get comments back. They're like, oh man, maybe maybe too many effects, or maybe are the vocals too compressed? And I'm like, so instead
it's always a question, like we have the answer.
Yeah.
Like, well, the answer was the mix I just said.
Well, so of course I send it. I'm committing. I think the mix is done, but but I'm not right. I'm right in my opinion, but I'm not actually right. What ends up being right is what the compromise we all come to in the process of figuring out through communication, what it is that the artist is looking for, and you're trying to give it to them. And that's the real crazy gray area of what we do in studios is like we're creating something, this vision of the person who has to live with it the rest of their life is their music and their record. So you have to help them. You have to have a strong opinion about your process as long as it's not detrimental to, and you're not hurting their ego in the process. You have to be able to like go, okay, let's try something else, but you don't need to explain to them the technique you're using.
Right.
It's really important to not bog an artist down. Here's another lesson. Don't bog the artist down with technical information of how you're recording them.
Yeah. Unless you think that it's a choice that unless they need they're the kind of person to make.
Unless they're the kind of person who wants to know.
Right.
And they're pining to find that information out, and they're really curious and are asking you. Of course, communicate whatever you feel comfortable with. But in general, there's no need to explain even to the producer really exactly what you're doing, because if it sounds good and they're happy and you can keep up with everyone, you're not bogging it down. They're not like, oh, the engineer needs the drummer to play the snare drum for another 20 minutes. Like, you should be able to get a snare drum sound in 30 seconds.
Dude, I'm so glad you cycled back to drum sounds.
You need to be able
going with drum sounds.
Okay, so drum sounds, my approach to drum sounds is tuning first.
Okay.
Like all the records I've done, anything I've done with at Easy Eye Sound, I was involved in the tuning, helping the process. Like some drummers play a certain way and you don't need to do anything. But a lot of time, like at Dan's studio, for instance, or at Easy Eye Sound, it's the house drums. It's what's there.
Right.
So like whoever it is that may be playing the drums on a record, whoever that drummer is who's there, if it's in the band or if it's a session musician, whoever, they have a thing and they play a certain way. So then the drums need to be kind of altered to fit within the context of how they play.
Right.
And they make it sound a certain way. So they hit a certain way, they hit the drum a certain spot, and that all relates to the goal of the song that's happening. So you have the song structure, you have this tempo, you have this stylistic thing that's happening. So you're paying attention to what the intention of the style of the song is and how the drummer is playing. And then you're going, okay, is that snare drum pitched high enough? Is it pitched low enough? Is it ringing out too much? Is it dead enough or is it live enough? Are the cymbals the right cymbals?
Let's talk about pitching up and pitching down. Let's say you're like, okay, it needs to be higher or it needs to be lower. What's the next move? So give us a tip that would help us.
I'll look over at like Dan Auerbach, for instance, or whoever the producers, and they're like, don't you think the snare drum or the drums should be kind of more in this kind of realm? Like, this kind of 60s thing or this kind of 70s, like deader, lowered. Like, what do you think? He's like, I think, yeah, maybe that. Like, yeah, it needs to be pitched. So then we're like, oh, we need to change the snare drum out. So instead of trying to just tune that snare drum, you grab another snare drum that's already kind of more in that pitch. A deeper or shallower drum, one that's made of brass, one that's made of wood, whatever seems to be fitting.
Yeah.
You go to the drummer and you just go like, and all good musicians, session players or whoever are really open to doing that. Most of them. I've rarely run into drummers who are like, oh no, I got to use my drum. And the guys who do that usually don't get a lot of callbacks. Or they're in the band and it's just a pain in your butt and you have to convince them that this is what we're doing.
Right, yeah. What are some good ways to do that? Because that does come up sometimes.
Sometimes it's just taking stuff away from them. Like if they have that extra crash cymbal that it's unnecessary and they're hitting it too much, you just walk out and go, whoosh, and then you don't even explain it to them. Of course, I'm also used to working within the levity of a situation where it's a Dan Auerbach produced record, and someone who has a little more heavy hitter producers have more sway. You don't need to explain why a production decision is being made to the drummer. I'm not trying to shit on drummers. I love drummers. I'm a drummer myself, but like sometimes drummers can be a little bit pushy with their opinion about what cymbals they're using and things like that. And sometimes, you have to just walk in and go,
without a word.
Yeah. I walk in, I take the cymbal away, and they're just like, what happened? And they're like, where'd it go? And I'm like,
that was Collin.
I just feel like we don't
lifting the ride.
Yeah, not the ride or changing the ride cymbal, like walking over a different ride and going and picking the ride they're using and putting another one down and going, I think this is going to work better for the song. And then walking away, and they kind of have to, because they're about to play it again. So they can't sit there and argue with anyone about it. They're just like, okay, I guess that's what we're doing. And, I find that they kind of get over it quickly when they're put on the spot to not make a fuss about it.
Right.
In the middle of like, here, we're doing this. Or hey, well, everyone take 5. We need to change this kick drum. It's not the right kick drum sound. And it's the drum. It's not.
That's the one instrument where you got to take 5 to change it out.
It's the kick drum. It's not, the mic technique's not going to solve it. It's the drum itself. It really is like the drum sounds that you hear on records I've gotten. It's the drummer and the drums that make the sound happen. What I'm doing to get that to happen is just helping accentuate what's already happening by the drummer.
Can you describe some different kick drums and the different sounds that come from them?
Personally, I like drums that have a kind of a tone to them and not just be a low frequency thud pulse kind of thing. A lot of modern kick drum sounds are a mic inside and maybe a FET 47 on the outside, and it's more of a floppier sound to me. It's a lower pitch sound, and that's cool. It works within the context that someone's doing. If that's
when you say floppier, you mean it's sustaining, or
it's just tuned lower. It has more of a modern sound. The drum head tends to be, the Power Stroke 3, which I'm not a fan of. Like when I see those on drums in studios, I get rid of them.
I don't know if mine's the 3, but I think I have the Power Stroke upstairs.
But I tend to get rid of the Power Stroke drum heads because it doesn't work for the sound that I tend to like to get, that people like when you're working with me, I tend to like, this is not the sound. So like I like coated Emperors or the fiber skin or something that has a more of a actual texture to it on the batter side. So the batter side is hitting something that creates a more of a like a hip hop J Dilla, because I grew up with hip hop. Like hip hop's a big part of my life too as a kid. Like growing up, like a more of a hip hop kind of like this messed up sound. It's not perfect. If you saw the kick drum and
that's on the beater head.
The beater side. The beater side is more of a texture thing. It's not such a click and boom low thing. It's more of a. It's like.
Yeah. So the modern thing you just described, like the beater side is the click,
and the beater side is like just.
The resonant front head,
it's the fiber, like Power Stroke 3, it's more of a plasticky kind of sound. It's like more of like,
which I get sick of. I want to get that J Dilla sound.
Yeah, J Dilla sound is tuning the drum up a little bit higher than you think it needs to be. It's using using a smaller drum, using maybe a bigger drum but tuned higher, like putting pillows and stuffing it in different ways, playing with the stuffing.
What about the front head for that kind of sound too?
I like solid front heads for some sounds, just because of the pressure of the two heads and the way they resonate and how you can play with their tuning to get it to resonate a certain way. Like, and then when I do a solid front head, I tend to like, there might be a little bit of a pillow or something inside, but of the drum, mostly to get rid of the basketball poing sound.
Yeah.
It's not there to lean on the heads and dampen them on the inside. It's more about just getting rid of that boing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it just sounds like
you kick it goes boing. It's like this
like somebody hit an empty
1K
mailbox
or something. Yeah, it's like boing. It's like a basketball bouncing sound. Like so there's something.
Especially if the mic's inside, you really hear it.
Yeah, you hear it even more. But like, so there's some kind of dampening in there to get rid of some of that boing, right? So I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that basketball sound. Because I don't want to get rid of that frequency range, because that's kind of part of the tonal structure of the drum, like that, the attack of the beater and the thuddiness of attack. Front head. So if I'm using a solid front head, I have no hole in it, then I'm leaning a pillow on the batter side and leaning a small pillow. Maybe it's just a rolled up cloth, right? A rag or something that's underneath the kick pedal and it just kind of rides.
It just touches the edge of the head.
When the pedal stomps down, it's not actually touching the thing, but maybe you have to use a little gaffer's tape and maybe it's a towel that rings up along the thing, along the
it's like a smiley. It's
smiley
like the
face and rides the wood rim,
front.
And it's taped to the back head. So that gets rid of some of the.
That's on the beater side. No, that's on the front head.
No, it's on the beater side. Now
okay.
the back. Now the resonant side, which is the front head, I can take a little bit bigger of a pillow and like one of those camera sandbags, which I'm a big fan of getting those sandbags. Yeah, because you can put them on mic stands, weigh things down with them. Yeah. So take one of those, take a packing blanket, lean it up against that front head, put the sandbag on it, and then you can kind of slide and adjust that packing blanket till you get just the right amount of sustained overtone from that front head. So that front head it's dampened enough, but it has just enough. It's not too dead, and it's not going. But it's going and it has just enough of a tone, and then the tuning of it and its relationship with the batter side, and I'm not too particular about a note or anything. That's just about how they're relating and creating, and then I put a mic on the front of that, on the outside. It's probably, sometimes it's a D12. A A lot of times it's some type of dynamic mic that has a focus on the texture. I'm a big fan of
the D112 is the right choice.
No,
or
the
wrong
D112
choice?
is the modern version of that. That's a very smiley face microphone.
Yeah.
Scooped out some of the 500 and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Is scooped out of that microphone. The D12 has more of that and leaves all that stuff in there. Or some of the other dynamic mics from that era, like an AKG made or EV made a bunch of different mics. Like there's a 667 and 668. That sounds pretty good on kick drum. RE15 sounds pretty good. It doesn't have as much super subsonic low end, but it's a cool sounding. Sometimes I use a combination of a dynamic and like an Earthworks omnidirectional microphone,
like the TC series,
TC or something like that. Like a real
right
modern.
next to each other.
Like I put it up right up there, and it becomes another part of the sound. But these things always get blended onto one track.
Right.
Like if I have 3 mics on the kick drum, if it's like a batter side mic and a front head and that Omni mic, I find a blend of the 3, and it's being committed through whatever compression EQ that I'm using also onto tape, onto Pro Tools, onto a tape machine, whatever. So
remember that polarity switch, Rockstars?
Yeah, that comes in handy. Sometimes I'm even doing trickery where I have to play with like one of those phase adjustment tools, like the Little Labs one on one of the mics to find a spot.
Right,
so
interesting.
Like just taking one of them and playing with its overall phase, overall polarity, however you want to look at it. It's not really a time thing. It's an all pass filter that's adjustable. So it's more, they call it a phase adjustment tool, but it's probably it's a constant your ability to constantly shift its degree of polarity.
Right.
Full 360. So sometimes that is inserted in between line levels. So that means sometimes if I'm doing that, if I find I need to do that, if I'm given the time to search for that, I can take that. For instance, if I'm on a board, like an API board that has inserts, I can just insert that phase adjustment tool on the insert of the channel because I'm using the board to track with. Right. Or I'm in a studio. Here's another thing it's another caveat of the process in which I work, which is I have to, in most cases, if someone is hiring me to track a record, I'm a super big fan of making sure that the studio I'm working out of has a mixing board with buses. 8 absolute minimum, but it's really helpful if it has 16 buses. So like an old MCI 400 series, an API that has 16 or 24 buses. A Neve VR, I'll use those, whatever. It doesn't matter because I'm just using it as a summing matrix. It allows me to take and commit multiple microphones to a track. So I can be done with the sound then and there. So
even if you're going into Pro Tools.
Right? No, absolutely. Like day one, it's done. Like if you opened up a Lana Del Rey song or the Cage Elephant or the Dr. John record or any stuff I did at Dan Auerbach's studio, drums are maximum of 6 tracks.
Right on.
Maximum.
Get the sound and stick
that's
with
it.
The sound.
Like it's like when Cage Elephant, when I handed the multi-tracks to Tom Elmhurst to mix, the drums were on 4 tracks on that record. The toms were committed to the overhead mic in mono. The close mics were on 1 track with the overhead sound because that's the sound that they need to be. That's the level they need to be at.
4 tracks, you said?
Yeah. It's kick, snare.
That's how many tracks there were on Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah.
For drums.
Kick, snare. The toms were committed they were committed to the tone mic. I had a kick, snare, an overhead mic. Then I had an overall tone mic, which is 2 or 3 mics around the drum set, all being summed to 1 mono mic. And that when that's blended in, it creates this depth, this structure, and this tonality. And it could be like this mic that's sitting on the floor over here, and this mic that's pointing from this angle, and then the tom mics onto that track. And so like when they get that, when you listen to that blended together, it becomes the sound of the song.
Yeah.
It's like the moment you're like, okay, there's the sound of the song. And that's always been the case with anything I did with Dan Auerbach, because he was really adamant about finding the sound for the song and committing to it. So it's not second guessing it.
Yeah. I think that's so great. And it's one of the things that, I feel like it's actually taken me a while to finally come to terms with. I embrace the world of the computer so much. And
we all do, yeah.
I love what's possible, but I think we've just we so easily overlook that fact that by not having a console, we're forgetting to do a whole lot of things that we would have otherwise used to have done, as far as like committing to a sound and getting a sound.
Because
and then,
technically we were limited to that.
Yeah, because like you can't do the parallel thing when you're doing everything individual into Pro Tools and trying to do it in real time. You can do it afterwards,
and you'll never get the point. You'll never get the blend right, anyways, because like you're talking about microphones going into all these circuits, and how they're nonlinear. The nonlinear aspect of those circuits coming together. For instance, like taking those microphones and blending them together into that bus amp that's in the board, and that bus amp maybe at a certain gain point, it starts to become less linear at certain frequencies because of its distortion. Its harmonic distortion starts to lift up. It starts to become less linear. It's not totally representing what's giving. There's adding harmonics, adding distortion. It's and the EQ that's on that channel or the EQ that's on that blend is now shifting the phase, because what EQ does, analog EQ shifts the phase at certain frequency points. At the crossover point of the EQ, it shifts the phase. So that phase shift because you put this 550 EQ, or you put some kind of EQ in line to maybe cut a little bit of that harsh mid-range out, or to boost a little bit of that thump, that like 80 hertz, or a little bit of that like even 120, that like hip hop thump that happens in the kick drum, like your
hip hop thump.
Yeah, like you're boosting, like, and then you're going into, let's say, like my favorite, the Spectrasonics comp limiter, like it's a great snare drum like compressor. So like you're using these different devices and they have nonlinear points of operation, but you're sending a blended signal to it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't take all those multi-tracks in the digital world and reproduce that blend and the emotional impact that blend had at that moment. You could bring it back and send it back out and run it through all that equipment again and probably get close.
But guess what? Nobody would have heard it when it was going down.
Yeah,
if you do it
you wouldn't
later.
have a memory of how it sounded. So you're not going to know what it was. So
well, when you do it in real time, the drummer's hearing what that sound is. And everybody's hearing what that sound is.
And this leads to the next really important aspect of tracking music with musicians, is that they're inspired by what they're hearing. Artists are inspired by what they're hearing at the moment, not after you've done all these things and you've gotten to the point of like, oh, well, no, the mix, we'll start working the mix now. Like they're inspired right now, or they're not. And if they're not inspired right now, then they're going to start fighting everything. They're going to start fighting the process. They're going to start fighting because they're not emotionally engaged, because it's not sounding interesting. You're not pushing boundaries for them. You're not trying hard to get them to be happy with the sound. They're just like, you're like stuck. If you're stuck in a way of doing things, or stuck in a mentality of like, oh, well, this is how I always do it. I do it this way. This is my thing. I always use this mic preamp, and I always do this. I always use this overhead mic. I always use this mic on snare drum. I always do it this way. You're not inspirational. You're not inspiring the artist and the producer who's hiring you to just go at it and try it and take some leaps of faith of messing up. And it's really important not to be afraid of messing up.
Yeah.
It's important. I'd rather for one of the songs in the album to not have, or for me to be like, have someone go, you know what, we might need to retrack the bass or something on the song, because the sound isn't right. Maybe they weren't listening enough at the moment, and everyone was feeling it, but it's not the right sound. They need to redo it. Oh, what? You go, okay, cool. We were going down that road, and people weren't happy, with it.
Yeah.
Because at that, they ended up not happy with it. So now we got to redo something. No big deal.
Bass is just one of those funny instruments too, where sometimes it's so much easier to figure out how to get a great bass sound if the bass is overdubbed in the control room with the speakers going.
I usually do. That's usually, in an easy eye situation, like at Dan's studio, the bassist is out on the floor with the drummer typically.
Right.
Most of the time, it's a DI that ends up being the sound. That's the only sound of the bass is the DI. So then it's the player, the bass itself, the DI, and then the signal chain that went through. Most of the time, it's just the fact that there's a really good bass player playing the bass. That's why it sounds really good.
Right, totally. Do you feel like the time you spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Here are just some of the things students are saying about the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass.
Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process I have ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour lesson.
David P.
Thanks for a great session, dude. Just when I needed the inspiration.
John F.
A true feat of greatness. It was really life-changing and worth way more than I paid.
Mark R.
I've literally watched it 2 times at length, taken a plethora of notes, then combed back over some sections even more. You guys really knocked it out of the park on this one, and it was so incredibly eye-opening and useful immediately. What else can I say?
Shane J.
Amazing masterclass with Craig Alvin. My biggest takeaway was the concept of adding a subtle combination of distortion and compression to achieve a buttery cohesion in the sound. But there is so much more.
Steve K. Listen, I appreciate you listening to this podcast, and I know you're trying to make your best record ever. But when you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then you're ready for UltimateMixingMasterclass.com. Well, let me ask you this question. I've definitely heard some samples where, and I'm a total convert to the DI is a great way to record the bass because you can get a great sound that way. It can be extremely difficult to try and blend a DI with an amp sound and get what you think you were wanting to get at times. But sometimes when you record with the bass player, sometimes they'll play through a DI and they overplay and they really don't get the good sound out of it. Do you run into that sometimes? And you got any tips for making sure that they are getting the best
headphone mixes?
Out of the
one
DI?
thing is headphone mixes is really important. So like I said, inspiration. If the headphone mix is out on the floor, I always really strived, when working on any session, especially working with people who are really focused. Like some people, the general headphone mix is enough and they're happy with it. But some bass players, using a bass player as an example, really they're so used to there being an amp playing off an amp. So just having it in their headphones throws them off.
Yeah, it just feels like the wrong instrument.
Yeah, they feel disconnected. So, I'm always shaping the sound while I'm tracking. So it's a DI. I'm not just recording it cleanly and being done with it. I'm going, all right, so that needs to go into an LA3A. And then it goes into an EQ. And I'm cutting some of whatever that seems muddy to me out. With an EQ, and then maybe that's going into another compressor and it's compressing in a different timing factor. Maybe not a lot.
How often would you split it and do a blended distortion or something?
No, this is tracking, committing. This is just being this is the DI. I mean, the first thing to do is I don't just start doing all these things. I don't just compress automatically. I put the fader up of the mic preamp on the board, just feeding to the bus, and I start listening and I go, how's the bass player sound and playing? Some basses in the DI and the player is just really great. And you're like, oh, great. This guy is really not super dynamic. He's really controlled and he's really good at giving this really great solid sound. And it's not hassle. And you're just like, all right, so I don't need to put any compression on him. He's just on it. So you don't need to put any compression. Some guys, the sound of their bass and how they're playing and how hard they hit, and how focused they are on the part they're playing and all that stuff. It tends to maybe sound a little more loose and waffly and doesn't have so I tend to like shorter scale basses. Honestly, I think the short scale basses sound better to me than long full scale basses sound as far as electric bass is concerned. The Mustang and the harmonies and all those shorter scale basses all sound cooler on recording to me. They just have more of the kind of mid-tone that holds the note a certain way and has a certain kind of plucked, a certain kind of transient information. It's not so low end and kind of floppy sounding. It's more boom, boom, boom. It sounds more like James Jamerson to me, basically.
Right.
So then it's like,
did he play a short scale?
I don't know if he did or not, but just saying it ends up sounding.
He played drunk lying down on the ground.
It didn't matter. He was amazing. like he played with
one
his
finger.
he played with his thumb. Yeah, only which is amazing. So.
Oh, that's so funny, man.
Yeah.
Well,
that's bass.
cool.
Bass in a nutshell. It comes back to headphones. It comes back to headphones sounding good and sounding inspirational. Same with lead singers. It comes back to them being able to put the headphones on and hear a certain amount of effects, hear themselves real clearly, really compressed so they can really hear themselves, or find that maybe some singers don't want to hear themselves so well and you have to change the blend.
Yeah.
And you do it on the fly and just give them what they want.
Yeah. Let's but we're about to wrap up, but before we do, let's ask you for some good tips on getting cool snare sounds, kind of splatty, compressed snare sounds.
I mean, start with the drums that sound interesting.
Are we just putting a 57 on it and crossing our fingers?
I'm not necessarily a fan of 57 is actually probably not my first snare drum choice, Mike.
I'm glad to hear that. I want to hear what you do.
I tend to like microphones that I can stick in at a closer angle. So side address microphone condensers tend to win out on the top mic for me. So
they're sort of coming up the side of the drum and looking over the head or something?
Straight down.
Oh, straight down. Okay, cool.
I think the top mic needs to have a certain amount of the crack and not so much the sound of the stick hitting the center of the drum head, but the top mic for me is more about the pulse, the overall low frequency pulse that comes from the drum. So it's totally in polarity or phase to that pulse. So it's it's the E22S Jefferson or
that's
AKG.
a great mic. I haven't used that on snare. I've used it on toms all the time.
I love it on snare. Or AKG 414 or KM86i Neumann, which is a solid state condenser, medium diaphragm, side address, or those newer Audio Technica side address condensers.
What's so special about side address?
Just because drummer can't hit it real easily. It's like you can just get the capsule in right over the edge, having it pointing and have it like an inch or two from the top head and have it pointing right down the drum head, but have it only an inch or two in on the drum, but not have it vertically getting up in the way of the hi-hat. Like having this mic that has to be pointing straight down, then the back end of the mic where the cable plugs in might be, you might need to put it at an angle and pointing at the drum in a way that you're trying to reject some of the hi-hat. So if the back of the mic is pointing straight up, now it's rubbing against the bottom of the hi-hats, it's getting in the way. So side address just is more about the physical ability of getting it in there. I mean, there's guys who make amazing sounding snare drums with 57s. It just never seems to work for me. For whatever reason, I tend to like condensers more on the top, and usually some kind of dynamic on the bottom. Maybe I'll use 57 on the bottom, something that allows me to get a little bit of the snares.
Yeah, where does the bottom mic go to be useful? So you got this one on the top looking straight down. Does the bottom mic need to be in the exact same spot, like if you remove the snare, it would see the mic above it, kind of thing?
Not necessarily. I mean, sometimes I'll do like a mirrored image of itself, so that it's exactly in the same spot. And if I want to try to be real phase conscious, like the same distance, take a tape measure out, and I measure things in metric because it's easier. So 2 centimeters, whatever, 3 centimeters, 3.5 centimeters, whatever it is, the top one. The bottom one is there to mainly catch the sound of the snares and actually gives you some of the low end too. When it's the right kind of blend and the right kind of relationship to the top mic, it actually gives you a little more of the low end.
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, so those two things get blended together always to a track. If I'm separate, I never send a bottom mic separate on a recording for someone else to figure out how to blend later on.
Nice, nice, okay.
This is the snare drum sound. Here's this kick drum sound. Here's the overhead sound.
Now, what about compression? Where does that come into play?
It really depends on the drummer. It depends on the song. Compression gets used on these things, but it really depends on the goal of the song. Like kick drum tends to need a little bit of compression just because even really, really, really good session drummers, are decently dynamic. I mean, there's guys who are so controlled that you don't need any compression on their the close mic because it's literally But since I'm shaping and tonally shaping something for the purpose of the song, compression ends up being a part of that because it helps push it into the place it needs to be right away.
What are some things that help you notice that you're going to need some compression on this kick drum? Do you
it's just like when you start listening to it, you just start listening to the mics and just start getting your blend, and you start hearing these kick drum hits that are randomly like boom, real loud, and then the rest of them are going boom, boom, boom,
right,
boom, 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 boom. And you start hearing that, like one is like 10 dB louder randomly, then you're like, all right, I need to put a little bit of compression on it. Or you have to just try to convince the drummer to like kind of go, hey, your kick drum is really dynamic. Like, are you going to play like that in the song?
Yeah.
But like I said, sometimes you're recording bands and the drummers are just how they play, and you have to just deal with it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a little bit of compression on the way in, more compression during mixing, And
it's worth qualifying that and saying that it's not because you have to deal with it because that's just tough luck. It's also you have to deal with it because if you made a change to that drummer, you start to change the way the band plays.
Yeah,
together.
you don't want to mess their head up.
Yeah, you can mess up the quality of the sound of the whole band.
You can mess up the feel of the drummer by it just depends, and you have to feel out like how much you know the musicians and how much they're willing to listen to these things. Are they capable enough of a musician that if you did make a suggestion, that they would be able to follow through with that suggestion? Yeah. I mean, some guys and gals, sorry to just say guys, I guess it's a term. I choose it. I'm from Detroit, so you say guys about everything, but some people will, some players will, or they just have a thing that they do, and you can't mess with that.
Yeah,
they're absolutely. Maybe not technically as good as some other people, but they have a thing, and you have to just let that thing be what it is, and you have to figure out how to accentuate it.
That's awesome. Well, dude, we've been going for a good long stretch.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna take us right to the closing question here. Okay. This one is hypothetical, but we're gonna take the Wayback Studio machine.
Okay.
And you're gonna go back in time, find young Collin Dupuis.
Okay.
Learning his jazz drums or just starting to get into recording. You're hanging out with Norman, getting your studio dialed in, and you go back and you say, listen, dude, I've come back in time and I'm wearing this spacesuit and I look like Michael Jackson because I want to give you this one bit of advice. Or no, like, dude, what was it? Dude, Where's My Car? Which is the one where they go back in time?
Oh, to Bill and Ted Doctor Adventure?
Yeah, Bill and Ted. Yeah. Ted, those guys.
Those guys, yeah.
So you go back in time and you find yourself, you say, listen, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to understand and know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. Man. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself?
I would say, really, I think it's really important to pay attention to what's going on around you and keep your ego checked. Keep your ego checked. Like really, no matter how much you feel that you are right about something, in your mind, you're like, I know the answer to this. Like you may actually be right. But figure out how to use your people skills to express that thing that you want to express to them, to the situation, without stepping on any toes. That's really hard to do because sometimes it's just, you're dealing with other people's egos, and there's no way of expressing that thing, and they just aren't going to understand. So you just don't do it. Just keep it to yourself. But if it's something that you think that you can improve upon the situation, the sound of something, or the approach to something, is be like, wait for the moment in time to bring it up and say, you know what, I think we should try this, and figure out who it is that you can bring it up to, where they're actually going to listen to it and take what you have to say. Because, like I said, if you're the engineer on a record, your opinion counts as far as the sound of it and how quickly you can get the job done for people and how efficient you are about achieving the goals of the producer and the artist. That's really what they want you to do, is be really fast on your toes and be able to switch gears. Your opinion doesn't matter as much. It matters in the sense that you have skill sets and you can provide and give them what they want, but like verbally, your opinion doesn't mean anything. So you have to be able to keep that in check, and just know when is the right time to say it. Because like many people, I've opened my mouth in the wrong time, and I've upset the situation or created tension when it probably didn't need to have tension, because voiced my opinion about something, or I reacted to something in the wrong way and it wasn't the right reaction.
Even if it's a positive reaction.
Yeah,
like sometimes I get excited about something, right? I'm like, and that totally reminds me of, and then they're like, ooh,
I hate that song.
I hate that.
Yeah, I hate that song. So it's real. And you learn this on the job. You learn like how sensitive some people can be, and you learn how to try to gauge that sensitivities to different things and people's likes. I mean, and you're going to get into a session with somebody that you guys just don't get along. There's going to be artists or musicians in the band, someone in the band. There's going to be someone every now and then. You're just going to, your personality and their personality, you just stay far away from them as much as possible. Try to figure that out. Figure out who it is in the situation where if you feel that there's something going on, like try to keep yourself out of a conversation with them and out of being involved in what they're doing, because for whatever reason, maybe you're rubbing them wrong, but you're not trying to do something wrong. It's just who they are and who you are. And
I'm going to remind everybody too, that there is not a safe place in the studio to voice and comment how much that person pissed you off. And I've made that mistake.
We all have.
Because you walk into the control room and you tell somebody and you forget that the talkip mic is on,
or whatever, or if someone heard it, or someone just heard you. Like, I mean, just someone else heard you and they report it back to that. I mean, you have to get really good at, keeping your mouth shut within the context of unnecessary comments and unnecessary. You're just gonna create problems for yourself. It's because it's gonna come back on you, even if you are right. I mean, actually, really right in a situation. No one's gonna view it as you being right or wrong. They're gonna view it as there's an antagonistic situation going on here. Someone's uncomfortable and now they're not performing properly and the whole day is shot, and it doesn't matter whether you're right or not. You just screwed the whole situation up because of you're creating tension. So learning to not create tension, yet not be a pushover and not have an opinion. You have to have an opinion to get somewhere, to get sounds, but you have to be extremely helpful to the process.
And, just to close that thought too, if you can't figure out a way to share your opinion, then your opinion's never going to get used. Yeah. So that's why you got to do it.
Yeah.
If people can't accept your opinion because of the way you're poorly delivering it, your opinion never gets over.
Yeah. It's really important to figure out how you can voice your opinion in a process.
It's probably a great opinion too.
Yeah. My opinion is it's really important to be able to figure out how to voice your opinion in this creative process that we're all in the room together doing, without, blowing the whole thing up or turning on extra fire in the room for no reason and making someone upset. I mean, there's so much insecurity in the process for some people. Some people, it's like they're opening themselves up and being extremely vulnerable. Like they're singing and performing, like this art that they've worked on. And you have to figure out how you can support that, even if you don't like it that much. Sometimes you might get into a situation where you've been hired and some of the songs are amazing, and then there's just one song or two songs where it's just, you're like so not into it because that's just, you're a human being and you have to just do the same job. If you just give a job, and maybe instead of the song being something you focus on, you just focus on getting good sounds and making it work, so
that's awesome,
super important stuff.
That's awesome. Great advice. Thank you so much for being on the podcast with us, dude. Total pleasure to hang with you. Let the rock stars know how they can find you online. Where should they go to learn more about you, hear your music? How do they reach out to you and make their next hit record?
Well, I mean, you can look up my discography via probably some links that are going to be provided. If you want to look at All Music hasn't had my full discography. Discogs.org has more things I've worked on. That's just as far as like recordings I've been involved in.
What's the next record you would love to make?
Oh man.
How do you describe that record?
I'm really I want to work on music that I like. So I tend to like music that's a little on the strange side, in a personal way. Like I like music that tends to push boundaries and, and isn't really specifically in a genre. It's just, I don't like safety in music. I think music that plays it safe is not really fun to listen to. So I like it when people are trying to like push things a little bit. Even if it's really mild pushing, you're still like, oh, let's take a risk and try this thing out. Like, for instance, I really like using tape machines for non-linear recording, like putting stuff onto tape machines and using them as various speed pitch devices instead of recording onto tape for the sound of tape, but just going, let's do the background vocals. Let's do a trick on the background vocals. We're going to run the background vocals in there and we're going to pitch them way up. And
tape alignment is for wimps.
We're going to we're going to create all these really low frequency. Yeah. Well, actually tape alignment is an interesting subject in itself. Like, but like we're going to put the bed track of the music and we're going to do all the background vocals onto tape and we're going to pitch the tape machine down like 2 whole steps, do these 1 overdubs and pitch it up to half step or a half step and a half or something and do these other overdubs all in key. And then we're going to bring it all back to the point it was at, dump all that stuff back in and line it back up. And now you got these vocal overdubs that are in these strange pitch places. But now with some of the newer software that's out there, it's getting better. Vary speed and pitch shifting is getting better. But there's just something about pitch shifted on tape, very speeded things on tapes. It's just, there's a sound to it.
It's a great trick.
It's really a sound.
And it was such an easy one with the 4-track. You just grab it and turn it and go.
Yeah. Like just any kind of very speeding the drums. Like, it made the song to be slower. It's very speed the drum, put them onto tape, very speed them down. And now we're going to finish doing the overdubs on these slowed down song and very speeded down. It just sounds cool. It's like cymbals are like, drums are like, blah. Like, it's like, oh, that's such a cool sound.
Awesome, dude. Well, I hate to bring this to a close, man. We'll just have to do another one next time.
Yeah.
We'll focus on mixing next time. But
yeah. Instead of jazz history.
It's all right, man. It's great stuff. The passion is palpable. There's the 2 P words back to back. Thank you for being here, man.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to hang with you. I can't wait to hear the next records you make and but hopefully come check out your mix studio when you get it all out.
Yeah. It's almost up and running. I've taken my sweet time because I've built it myself, most of it. So it's just it's a work in progress. I got the acoustics pretty good. I mean, the test measurements are showing good. So the next thing is going to be finishing it up and putting the flooring in and doing all that final stuff and then sealing it up and being like, all right, now it's done. Now I can just work here and not have to deal with like any more construction.
Cool, man. Well,
all right, man.
Thank you for being here.
Yep.
We'll see you around the studio, dude.
All right, cool, man.
All right, cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. OWC, Jay-Z Microphones, PreSonus, Spectra 1964, and API Audio. You will find links to all these wonderful sponsors in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. So thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.